Hey guys, and welcome to another video. This is going to be on my Plague Spike Toxic Mist build. I am going to talk about alternatives in this video, and I'm going to be doing this in a new format. So I'm going to do how to start, okay, go through the acts, and then I'm going to do a more optimized version of the build, and then at the very end is going to be a TLDR for the people that don't want to sit through a very long video. They just want the breakdown of the build. Now, if you go that route, if you do just go straight to the end and go with the optimized one, keep in mind that gear and levels and so many things can make a difference, and you might have different results if you don't look through the whole video and see why I have picked the things I have picked. Obviously, if you want to go that route, you can do it. And if you are watching this video, even if it is after Season 10, which is when this build was made, if you are watching this video, it is up to date. That means I have gone back and edited anything that needed to be changed for the build, if the zodiacs have changed, or link runes have changed, or anything else. Okay, with that said, let's get into this thing. Okay, starting out here in Act 1, there are not a lot of options that are going to start you directly into your skill. Now, if you have selection boxes or something from a seasonal thing, you can start straight into your skill. Let's assume you don't, though. So what I recommend is starting with Fireball. Fireball is a spell that you get very early on. You will get the 3-socketed version from a quest reward. I'm pretty confident. It works really well early on, and it functions effectively the same way as Plague Spike, especially early on. So grab yourself a copy of Fireball, and then a copy of additional fire damage. Now, if you're starting out with the poison one, you will come down and take additional poison damage, which is green, okay? Either way, grab yourself a copy of this because you are going to end up using that later. Another copy that you want to get is Area Effect, as well as a copy of Disarm. A copy of Multi-Shot is generally pretty good early on. You are going to want a copy of Piercing for yourself for later, and then a quick cast and a spell damage increase, as well as time acceleration. That's all the stuff you're going to buy. Now, you're going to set up your skill Fireball. The things you wanted on the most are quick cast, so you can cast faster, and then the additional fire damage, and the other stuff's for later. Disarm, time acceleration, and the other stuff is for later. As for your movement skill, it really doesn't matter what you use here. Personally, I recommend taking Roll because it is just a good movement skill early on. It's got good cooldown, it moves you fairly quickly, it gives you some dodge rate amplification, and frankly, a lot of the move skills are lackluster early on. As for gear, you're going to buy yourself a copy of each of the basic pieces of gear. There are so few options for modifiers when you start out that just buying a helmet, a shoulder, a chest, a glove, a boot, a belt, 2 rings, and an amulet, and then putting them on and moving through is going to give you more or less exactly what you want. The only time that you might even consider buying a second thing would be with rings, because you're either going to get the physical ring or you're going to get the element damage ring, and obviously you want the element damage. Necklace could potentially give you something, but really just grab a set of gear. When it comes down to using wands, dual wielding wands, using wand and shield, or using a staff, totally up to you, especially through the early parts of the game. It's not going to make much of a difference. Shield will give you an extra layer of defense with block, but that's about it. In terms of damage, they're all going to be relatively the same. So grab a copy of each of those, toss some stuff onto your Fireball, and get through to Act 2. When you're in Act 2, you're going to take a look at the stuff that we can get. There's not too many things that are going to change. Now, you do have access to, in Act 2, the spell activation on spell hit. I don't recommend using this early. It's going to be more of a hassle to set it up, and it's not going to do much for you overall. Even though, yes, you can get a whole bunch of things, Act 2 is not a time to bother with this. Just get through the act. So, with that said, you are going to want to get a copy of Release Elements. Now, later in the build, we are going to switch our Enhanced skill. Early through the game, this is going to be your best friend. It gives you element damage amplification, and more importantly, it gives you cast speed, which is a bit hard to get early on in the game. This will really help you get through bosses quite quickly. So get a copy of this, slap on your cooldown one that I forget the name of, it's blue, from the thing and get yourself a copy of... Is there not duration in here? Never mind, it's not in here. I don't know what I'm talking about. You get a copy of use count for your movement skill with disarm. And as for link runes, you can potentially switch to confidence here. Now, confidence is not something you're going to want to use much later, but right now, confidence is probably the best bet. Now, people will talk about that it grants barrier regen immunity to self, so that means if you hit something, your barrier won't regen. I highly recommend, as a spellcaster, not worrying about being a barrier spellcaster until you finish the story. Getting barrier and getting it to be useful through the story is not worth it, so don't play barrier. All of your armor should either be dodge or armor and resistances, and that's all you should worry about through the story. Confidence is great because it'll give you your cast speed, but it'll also give you damage, which the quick cast won't. So I recommend switching to this. Outside of that, I don't think there's anything else in here. The use count is good. Now, the other thing you can do, depending on if you are having any kind of mana trouble, is getting Thunderbolt from Act 1. Thunderbolt will let you do shock effect to enemies. We do use it later, so it's not bad to grab a copy of it, but it's also not a huge deal. Getting a copy of Thunderbolt will let you toggle on Thunderbolt. It hits enemies, it does shock effect. And then if you're doing shock effect, you're going to want to cause as much shock effect as possible. You can throw additional lightning damage on it. You can do the status effect link from the second act. That's about it, though. There's not many other things that you can use. And again, it's not really worth it. It's better to just focus on moving cleanly through the story, and your enhanced skill and your fireball should be able to do it. As for gear and stuff, when you want to get new gear is if you go to the act, or the thing, if you go to the, my god, I can't talk, to the blacksmith, when you look at the gear things, you can see where the new levels or new tiers of gear appear. Up to level 12, tier 1 is all you're going to get, and you shouldn't worry about trying to put on gear as you move through the story. When you hit level 12, buy a new piece of gear, put it on. Make sure your resistance are as high as you can get them. Make sure your arm and dodge as high as it can get. So at level 12, at level 29, at 41, 46, 56 are the times that you're going to do it. Doesn't matter what act you're in as long as you buy them there. Again, weapons in terms of dual wands, staff, or wand and shield, doesn't really matter. Sort of do whatever you want. The set, I think that's everything for the setup here. I don't think there's anything new. You may be tempted, again, if you're planning on being a spellcaster, you may be tempted to use cold armor. Cold armor is not worth having as a toggle until much later in the game. Also, things like readiness are not worth having early on in the game, because just getting through the acts with fireball until you can get to the poison should be your main goal. Also, we should talk quickly about your zodiac here. Act 1, or not Act 1, Trait 1, down through the bottom. I go through counterfeit senses rather than across the top, because here you get a little bit of cast speed. Later on, if you don't need the cast speed and you want a little more barrier, you can go up here, but I still don't recommend it. Trait 2, now if you're using the fireball, obviously you're going to go across the top to natural ignition. Once you switch to poison, remember to come back here and switch to stake out. And 3, I think that's about as far as you'll be in here, is going in gold. Now, if you're starting out and you're playing through the story and you're having survivability issues, don't do Gold Hunter. Gold Hunter gives you a lot of projectile damage amplification, but it also nukes your hit points. Later on, when you are a full barrier user, this won't matter at all. You can come back and get the damage. If you feel like you're having trouble, instead of going all the way to here, take these 2 points out and just go into the projectile damage and excellent senses. Okay, I think that's about as far as we need to go for there. I'm sure you won't be whatever level this is until the next act, so let's move on to Act 3. Into Act 3, we actually finally access Plague Spike. Now, at this point, you can switch entirely to poison, and you could even link it with one of the previous poison spells. I think there was Poison Orb or something. Actually, let me go back and check. In Act 1, there was, I believe, Poison Orb. And if you want to, you can go full poison and connect it with that. You can also, alternatively, let me click the thing. No, it was Act 2. Act 2 had Poison Orb. I totally know what I'm talking about. This isn't my first time making a video or anything. So you can use that spell if you want and go full poison and connect them. Now, the downside is Poison Orb honestly isn't very good, and I don't feel like it's particularly great. But if you want to link those two, you can. You can also just keep Plague Spike as the trigger, or the main skill, and have it trigger Fireball, and it's going to give you some amplification there. Honestly, it doesn't really make too much of a difference. Again, you're only in Act 3. Either way, this is when you can link your thing. So the big thing of Plague Spike is not that it is strong. It's that it weakens enemies when it hits them and gives you debuffs and stuff, and that's what makes the build fairly strong. So even if you're not going to go Fireball, if you want to go the Poison route, or if you do want to go Fireball, or if you want to go with Charge Release even, any of those, so you go Plague Spike as your main skill, link it to the second skill, you can, again, Fireball, heck, you could even use Frost Bomb at this point. It really doesn't matter, okay? You're not going to be staying with it very long, but you can switch to any of those, and then when you're in your Zodiac, you would do the same stuff, except that you would change this to whatever your main damage thing is. Again, this early, if you go Poison, if you go Fire, if you go Cold, it doesn't really matter. Just switch this one thing to that, and you'll be fine. Over in your Trait 4, you're going to go into Leaf, across the bottom over to Transcend and Attack. This is going to give you Area of Effect, which is great, and Area Amp, which is why you want to stick to spells that use area damage. Again, Fireball uses it, Charge Release uses it, Frost Bomb does not use it. Never mind, Frost Bomb does not use it. So I would stick with Fireball, Plague Spike, Charge Release, and whatever the other one, the Poison thing, any of those comboed together. The other one you want in Trait 4 is Stem, up through here to Path of Elements. Now, you want Twisted Element for the status effect rate. It comes into play later, but you might as well get it now because it is going to give you element amplification here. We definitely don't have to worry about up there yet. There's only, I think, one other thing in Act 3 that you want to pay attention to grabbing, which is... where did it go? The decrease or increased duration, which you're going to want to link to your enhanced skill. There's nothing else in here you really need to worry about. Time acceleration you should already have on your thing. Outside of that, if you are using Thunderbolt, you wanted to grab status effects. Never mind, it's not in here. It was in the last act. I totally know what I'm doing. Okay, moving on to Act 4. Act 4 is very quick because there's really only one thing you should be looking at, and that is the... Where'd it go? Decrease duration. Decrease duration on your enhanced skill. So there's a reason you should do that. The long story short is it will make your thing more powerful, but decrease the duration. And it's better to have a very powerful one that can kill enemies very quickly, rather than having a weaker one that keeps enemy alive, or keeps the effect going longer, but the enemies stay alive longer. Enemy can't do damage to you if his hit points are 0. That's pretty much it through here. Now you can, if you really want to, use a Shout of Provocation linked to buff activation on hit. It's going to give you some armor, but honestly, through the story, it's not a huge deal, and I don't really feel like it's super important. Later on, we are going to talk about uses for this when you start getting your barrier set up, but for now, if you want to use it, you can. Outside of that, there's nothing else in Act 4 to even look at. Act 5 is the next big act for us, where we get a copy of our big Persistence. Now, Persistence is going to make us so we don't crit, and early on, this is the best way to go. Making a crit build early on is not super easy to do, and it's not worth doing because it's so much easier to do this. So you're going to get a copy of Persistence, you're going to put it on your main skill, possibly grab a copy of Deadly Poison. It's not something you're going to use right now, but it is something we potentially are going to use later. Not super important to grab it or not. Outside of that, there is nothing else to even look at in here in terms of runes or anything else. And this is the point in the story where you should be able to get yourself a 6-socketed skill. Now, it's really easy to do this. As you play through the story, you are going to run into areas and you are going to clear them out, and then you can accept for getting 100% in every area. If you've done that the whole way, you can come over to the ore vendor and buy yourself enough of these, because 750 is your first pity rune that you will get a 6 link. In Act 5, you should have enough if you've done it correctly. If you've got all the stuff, you should be able to buy enough of these to 6-link your Plague Spike. And then you can put all the stuff you want on. The other thing you do want to pay attention to if you are playing through, is not hitting the wrong button like that, is you'll now have access generally about this point in the story to Act 5, to trait 5 in your zodiac. And you're going to want to go over 3 points. That's all you're going to use. Is over to here to distorted senses. Again, it's going to cripple your crit so you can't use it, but it's going to give you a huge amount of damage amplification. The other thing you are going to want to try and get, depending on if you are playing through a season and they give you a selection box, is a ring. And it is right here, a Band of Certainty. It's a level 20 or tier 25 ring, and it's going to stop you from critting, but it's going to let you do maximize damage strikes. And this, in conjunction with the other two, is going to be very strong. And if you can get a box for a selection box for a seal, you're going to want to get Seal of Persistence. Okay, and then all it's going to do, again, it's going to stop your crits, but you're going to do maximized damage, and it's worth having. I haven't talked about other seals or other selection boxes or anything because you don't need them. I made it through the story this season with my enhanced skill, my movement skill, and my main skill. I didn't even really get my setup for my skill linked until like Act 10, because you really don't need to do it. So get the crit stuff, the crit disabled stuff, sorry. Get your main skill, get your persistence link rune, 6-link your main skill, which is your Plague Spike. The other thing you should do is put on Pierce on Plague Spike. The link rune, I actually, now that I think about it, I don't remember where we got it. I think it's Act 1. But get Pierce because it will cause the Plague Spike to go through enemies and hit multiple. And then as soon as you are able, again, through a selection box or whatever source, get a copy of the... Where is it? So you want Piercing, and then you want... I'm so bad at this. I'm so bad at this. Parallel Multi-Shot is the other thing you're going to want. Once you get those two on Plague Spike, you will clear very well, no matter what other spell you're using. Okay, let's get over to Act 6 and actually get the rest of this build set up. Since we are in Act 6, we now have access to every single purchasable rune that we can get. The rest have to come from selection boxes and stuff, but this is the only one we need. And it is Toxic Mist. That's our main skill. At this point, you're going to link Plague Spike to Toxic Mist, and you're going to put on all the same stuff on Toxic Mist, more or less. You're going to want a Persistence, you're going to want poison damage. An area of effect is fine. Anything that's going to give this some damage. You don't need to get too particular. You should be able to rip through the story with this. Again, at this point, you should have potentially some boxes that have given you selection things, and you can get the basic link runes, the Piercing, Parallel Multi-Shot. Piercing isn't one. Parallel Multi-Shot, Persistence link rune, and that's more or less it. Now, if you don't have those two, you can buy them at the general vendor, who I don't know where he is in this act. There he's over there. You can buy them from these random boxes. The Lesser Mysterious Link Rune chest is a haven for all the things you're going to want eventually, rather than getting them through selection boxes. If you have the money, if you have 1,000,000 gold, throw it, buy 100 of these boxes, open them all up. They'll probably give you everything you need. So, at this point in the story, you should have your main skill 6-linked. You should be working towards 6-linking your Toxic Mist, which is now going to be your main damage dealer. It's the one that you're going to do more damage with it than Plague Spike, even though Plague Spike is your main skill. Your Plague Spike is there to debuff them, make them weak so that Toxic Mist can do the work. From here until the end of the story, that's it. That's all you're going to do. Now, we're going to jump to the later parts where we've now finished the story And I'm going to just show you the whole build, and you can piece it together from there. So you finish the story, you're in Act 13. Now you can actually start working on this build, because until here, you're just picking up or not picking up, you're sort of buying whatever basic gear will get you through the story. You're not a barrier user, you're not a crit user, and this build is both of those things. It is barrier and crit. So how you're going to progress from here is play through the story, the rest of the story. Okay, so you're going to have the Custodia area, and you're going to have the... I always forget the name of it. What is it called? Act 14? Giva. So you're going to play through those because that's going to get you some stuff to help you do some basics. And this is the point where you got to decide if you want to be a staff user, a double wand user, or a shield user. And it really doesn't make a massive difference. It's not like it's not like a staff user is going to be drastically stronger in some way than a shield and a wand or a dual wand setup. They're all going to be the same depending on what access you have to gear, and maybe there's new uniques that come out, or your knowledge of how to do basic crafting. With that said, what I tend to do at this point is I make a very basic set of gear. I make sure that my resistances are all 125 to 175 flat value, because that's the number you want to hit. So all of these here, don't look at the percentage, look at the flat value. You want to get your armor to like 50, 60, 80,000, okay, and you're going to do that through a couple of things, and you want to get your dodge as high as you can. Now, when it comes to barrier users, there are some things you need to know if you're going to be a barrier user. One, almost all of your barrier comes from your gear. You are going to get barrier modifiers from other places, but you have to think of your gear as your base value. It's like your health. If you had a really tiny health pool, all the amplification to it in the world isn't going to give you a lot. One of the biggest places in every single barrier build that you're going to get barrier from is your chest piece. So if you are going to start converting to barrier, that's where I recommend you start. Get a barrier chest piece with the absolute most barrier you can get. It's not going to be a lot, okay, depending on the tier of the thing you're going to get, and this is just to get you up and running. Okay, get a barrier piece, and ideally in the situations where there's, let's say, I'm not sure the tiers, but let's say tier 32 has 2 different barrier chest pieces, and you don't want a barrier armor or a barrier dodge. You want just barrier. If there is a choice between a barrier that has an implicit, like this, that says 10% mana, and a barrier one that doesn't have it, the one that doesn't have it is going to have a higher base value. That's not true in every single case. In tier 35, there is no alternate. It is one. There's only the one that has it, so the mana is the best one. But up to there, it's almost always 2. Take the one that has less. Doesn't has less. I can't talk. Take the one that has more maximum flat barrier. Then you're going to do some basic crafting to get gear barrier flat and gear barrier percent on the chest piece. That is going to give you your first chunk of barrier. That leaves the rest of your gear available to get your armor and your dodge. Okay, I tend to do 1 or 2 armor, and then 1 either split or 1 pure dodge. Okay, in this case, I've gone dodge rate on the gloves, I went armor on the shoulder, and then I went armor dodge here. And as you gain more power in the game and you get through Abyss Gate, getting Abyss Gate gear slot upgrades, as they are called, you can see that I'm getting extra from these. That will help you get to the numbers you want, so that you don't have to spend a lot of resources trying to get that armor and stuff up. As a barrier user, early on, your armor and your dodge are probably going to be pretty low, and you might have trouble with it. You might have to do specific pieces of gear. So like initially I did a shoulder that was all it was to amplify armor. I will probably link the video to that piece in the description of this video, so you can go see that if you're early on. But that's it for the helmet, the shoulder, the chest, and the gloves. Don't worry about what you put on your boots. because the defenses you can get from boots generally aren't very good, and ideally you want to get the Transcendent Aquaben's Garden, but we'll talk about that when we get to the actual gear. Now, I talk about if you're going to do a staff versus shield, whatever. I went with a shield because this season they let us, it's the 4th anniversary, and they let us pick one of the very hard to get Transcendent pieces of gear. I took Boreal's Heart, which is unreal for spellcasters. Spectacularly good shield. If you don't have access to some really powerful, like maybe you have a pair of wands that is unique and they're really strong and you want to go with that, you can totally go with that. You can totally go with the staff. If you do go barrier, or if you go with a shield, I would probably go with a barrier base and then get as much barrier as you can, doing the same thing that we did on the chest piece, getting the gear barrier. You can see that the unique one I'm using has gear, both of those, and it's got a lot of barrier. And that's really going to help buff up your overall, your barrier. When it comes to your amulet and your rings, they're going to be more or less non-negotiable which ones you would ideally want. But until then, go with just element damage and all of the standard fare, cast speed, and all of that stuff. As for belt, if you're not going to do the potion belt, there are a couple of ways you can go, but really just early on, just get what you need. So there's the basic setup of what you're going to want. Now, the question becomes, when do I switch from non-crit to crit? And that's pretty straightforward. 1, you need a weapon that has gear critical rate, so that the base critical rate of the weapon is like 25, 26 or higher base critical rate. Also, if you get a Passer's Refraction, generally they will give us these in selection boxes pretty early on, and I really recommend taking one because getting a nice high base crit early on will make it worth switching over. So you're going to need those 2, and then ideally you want charms that have crit rate, crit damage on every single one. I generally don't switch over to crit until I have all of that. You can switch earlier, you can switch later, it is totally up to you. There are other things you can do using the Opportunistic Strike Link Rune, which is something that was new to me. Probably only about a month ago I switched to it, and when I switched to it, it made a big difference. But there's some rules basically you're trying to follow when it comes to anything you're making changes on this character. 1, you want to get your cast speed as close to 5.0 as possible. You go to your skill, your Plague Spike, and look at its cast speed. You want it as close to 5.0 as possible. If you're at 4.5, it's fine. It's not a big deal. Obviously, you want to get to 5, but get it around there. 2, you want to make sure your resistances and stuff are all like 175. You want to make sure your armor is buffed up. You want to make sure it's about 80,000 or more, and your dodge probably about the same. Outside of that, you're going to want damage dampening as much as you can get from different sources, and that's the basic start. From here, it all becomes about minutia and figuring out exactly what to do with things. So that's, now that you're done the story, this is to get you from finishing the story to a usable point. And now we're going to talk about the version that I'm currently using, the like full-blown endgame version. So let's go through the Zodiac and the Zodiac stones and talk about things that I use, that I'm currently using, and things that you can switch to get what you want. Because the thing with a lot of this game is one piece of gear can make a big enough difference to change a bunch of things in your Zodiac. Or maybe you're lacking in one place and you're going to have to do something else. So I'm going to go through not just what I currently have, but other things I use, places you can switch points, places you can put points to get things you need, and hopefully it'll help you get to the end game build, because a lot of people that talk about build guides, they say it's for the end game and I don't know how to get there. So I'm going to talk about hopefully things that'll help you get there. Trait 1, we already talked about. Over to Desperate Tactic, nothing to see there. Your Zodiac Stone, when you finally get to Constellation in Time and start getting Zodiac Stones, you're going to want to hit a few things, and they're going to be the same across all 9 of the original stones. 1, you're going to want hit rate. Okay, and you can see here I've got hit rate and spell hit rate. 2, you're going to want element resist, again, up to 175 or higher all elements. And then you're going to want barrier or block rate. If you're not using a shield, block rate is good. If you're using a shield, you can go with barrier. It's not going to make a massive difference to your overall health, but it is going to help. Trait 2. Again, we should be full poison by this point. You're going to go across the bottom to stake it. It's poison damage amp and it's area of effect, which is nice to have. Same trait 2. Oh, hold on, go back. Trait 1 stone. You were going to want the damage one, the one that is just 30% damage at max. Don't go with the element one. You're not going to get 8 points. It's not worth it. So just damage. Trait 2 stone. You want barrier. As much barrier as you can get. The more, the better. 3. Again, now you should be converted over to barrier, so you definitely want to go down into Gold Hunter to get this projectile amplification. The hit point dampening isn't going to make a difference because you're going to have so much barrier that your hit point is going to pale in comparison. If we look at mine, you can't see it right now because it's not buffed up, but I'm about 200,000 barrier and I have 11,000 health. There's obviously a huge difference in the amount of the two, and losing even 100% health, putting me down to 1 hit point wouldn't make a difference because that's not what's keeping me alive anyway. It does make a difference, but for the sake of the story, it doesn't make much of a difference. So you can definitely take that in trait 3. The trait 3 stone, you can go one of 3 ways, and none of them really make much of a difference. Enhanced potion effect is the best one to take. Enhanced potions are powerful, and if you're going to be going with a potion belt, which we'll talk about when we get to the gear, it's the best one. You can go mana potion effect if you're having mana potion problems, but the more important thing is that none of these make much of a difference. Getting a zodiac stone that has 3 modifiers, preferably with 3 or 4 here, is what you really want. They are going to make a bigger difference. Getting like the difference between a trait, God, talk properly. A tier 2 barrier and a tier 4 barrier is like 60 barrier difference. It's a huge difference. So try to get those more than you care about the actual stone itself. Trait 4 we already talked about. You want area of effect, element damage, empty senses, and then any of these, it doesn't really matter too much. If you're having some resource cost problem, you can take this. It's only 1%, but it can help. And transcendent attack for area damage and area of effect. And then standard up in stem. From the bottom here over to Path of Element. Now you could go across the top instead of down here, but this one gives you 5 mana and this one gives you hit points, and the hit points don't matter, so you might as well take the mana. The stone we want here is barrier when 8 or more nodes are activated. Obviously is the thing we want more than anything. And again, you want 3s and 4s, the standard fare. In trait 5 is where we've got a huge amount of options, depending on what you need. So let's start with the biggest one, which is going up into elaborate attack. If you are not at a high critical rate, the elaborate attack, and just go to elaborate attack. Don't go over to Rainbow Bridge. It's not worth the points. So 3 points to get to here. Now, if you're non-crit, you will be in distorted senses. Once you switch to crit, remember to switch this back up to here. It's going to give you 10% critical chance. And the difference between critical chance and critical rate is critical chance is a block. It gives you 10 total percent. No matter what is happening to the rest of your crit, it'll give you 10%. Getting 10% additive will make a tiny little difference. Getting 10% critical chance gives you 10 total percent. It's very strong. You can see that I'm currently not using it because I'm at a very high crit rate, and these points aren't doing anything for me because I lose 10% maximized damage. I gain a little bit of critical damage, but it's 3 points for not much, and I'm currently not taking it. That is not to say that it is not a very solid thing, and you should absolutely use these especially if you're starting out switching to crit. The other one to talk about in here is Mirage. It's spell speed, spell cast speed, and damage on spell. Again, 3 points. It's a decent amount of cast speed amplification to help you get to that 5.0. Once you get to 5.0 and you can find other sources of critical as you make new gear and whatnot, you can come and take this out and again put those points elsewhere to get some amplification. The other one I always like to talk about is in lightning here. Way over at the end is group defense. It's 12% damage taken dampening. If you are starting out and don't have much in the way of damage taken dampening, this is a huge amount to get, and it works for all three. It works for physical, it works for element, and it works for chaos, so it is very nice. And then again, once you get some damage taken dampening, you can come take these 7 points out. I do recommend going across the top here if you take it, because it's got some damage against elite stuff. It's not much, but it's something. The other standard ones that I take are across here in contrast. Damage upon spell, going through refraction for some cast speed, and then over to strength and projection for cast speed amp, or sorry, damage amp, spell damage amp, I can't talk, and spell hit rate amplification. Much later in the game, because we're building this assuming that you're going to try to push into the end game, which is Abyss Gate. And at Abyss Gate, your hit rate actually really starts to become a bigger issue, so this is something you can grab. Also, if you're having mana trouble, a lot of mana trouble, taking 1 extra point down into mana on hit can help early on. Later on, we have a lot of other sources, and this isn't as effective, but you can take that. And the last one is in Hera, down to Knife-like Advance. This is something that isn't going to make much of a difference early on, but later on it's going to make a big difference. Attack Enhanced Skill Rune Effect Amplification, specifically Amplification, is something that you don't have very many sources of in this game. And if we look at my Attack Enhanced Skill Rune, very quickly here, so it's at 442.9 projectile amp, 442.9. And then if we go take that single point out and go back to it, hit the right button. So 442, and it goes down to 402. I lost 40% amplification there. That is a lot of damage amp to lose for a single point. But again, it's only going to matter if you have a lot of effect anyway. If you are just a standard player and you haven't got a lot of gear that gives you status or skill rune effect and skill rune effect, if you don't have a lot of skill rune effect, this won't make as much of a difference. And the downside of it is the resource cost amplification. This isn't something I typically do until much later in the game, but it is a very strong thing when you get to that point. Again, 40% damage amp for 1 point is a lot of damage amp. That's it for trait 5. The trait 5 stone, you want attack, aura, and seal effect, and then again, standard fare for the rest. Whew. Over into trait 6. Trait 6, we're obviously going to go from the center in breath over to annihilation. It is area of effect and area of effect amplifications, everything we want. Now, the other part in here, because I'm a shield user, is going across the bottom, up to fence, and up to mysterious shield. It's going to give you a ton of amplification, so 5% amp there, 8% damage taken dampening there, another 5% damage taken dampening there, and another 5% amplification here. So that's 10% amp and 18 or 13% damage dampening if you're using a shield. If you're not using a shield, there's a couple of ways you can go. One, you could put the 5 points over into sweep to get 6% amp, or you could put 3 points down into mysterious killer for a little bit of crit rate, so from here over. And that's all I would do, because you need 8 points to get the stone, and the stone itself isn't that important, to be super honest. That whatever one you pick, there are 3 main ones: crowd control dodge and status effect dodge, and it really doesn't matter too much which one you take. Crowd control dodge is really nice because then you're just not going to get stunned as much, even if you have other sources of it. Dot and status effect totally depend on a million other factors, but really just take the one that you have the least protection against. Dot, in some cases, and I don't know why, and I don't know exactly what causes it, Dot bypasses barrier. I don't know what causes it. If Dot just always bypasses barrier, or if there's something to it, and I am going to talk about a way to deal with that later, but if you're worried about dots, you can take Dot. Status effect is not a big deal until you hit the really late game, and then the status effects can be a problem. So really just take the one you need. Down into 7 is where we are going to spend a huge amount of our points, and there's a lot to say here. So I'm going to take 1 second to catch my breath, and then we're going to talk about that. Trait 7 has so many good things that you're going to put a ton of points in here, and they're very flexible points. You can put them as you need things, as you don't need things, as you want to get more, as you want to get different stuff. So standard 2 that I think are really solid are in Ortimus, down to Viper. It's area damage amplification and area of effect. It's going to help your Plague Spike effect hit a much larger area, and you're going to get overlap on all of those, so enemies are going to be hitting multiple times. It's really nice, especially for crowd control. The other one that is very important, which I had mistakenly talked about it not being important earlier in the season, and I want to rectify that now, is Thirst for Elements. Thirst for Elements is meh playing normal, but once you get to Abyss Gate, it makes a much, much bigger difference. The element damage amplification is really nice. It's got some other damage stuff. It's got some chaos stuff. Cool. It's this 1% chance to ignore enemy element resist. When you get to Abyss Gate, enemies' resistances, especially as you get higher and higher in the Abyss Gate, their resistances become so massive that you can't actually penetrate them. I talked about in a previous video that won't be on the channel anymore about the percentage poison penetration and flat poison penetration, and how, especially back in the day, you could use penetration to get the enemy's resistance to 0, and then use flat penetration to take their resistances into the negatives, so you would actually do more damage to them. In the Abyss Gate, there is no possible way that you can get their resistances into the negatives anymore, so worrying about getting their resistances into the negative doesn't matter. But this 1% chance to completely ignore them when they are at these massive values is really important. So definitely take this point. Even if you're not going to be doing Abyss Gate, it's still 5 points for 5% damage amp, which is a pretty standard trade-off in this tree. The other ones we've got here, critical rate when using a one-handed weapon. This is just solid. It's more crit rate, it's damage amp. It's a very solid 5 points. These ones are very good points, but there's a caveat, is that you need to have 500 of each stat. Now, I have 500 of all of them right now, and also I want to talk about that when we get to the stats too, but these are 5% amp for each one. So 6 points, 15% amp is a lot of damage amp, but you can only use them if you have 500. What you're generally going to start with is 2 or 3 points down to Place of Intellect, because you're going to be getting a lot of int, because we get damage amp from int and we get barrier from int, which is both things we want. Getting your strength and your dex up that high is quite a bit of a task, so it's likely what you're going to end up doing is just the 3 points down to here. 3 points for 5% amp is really good. And then Power of Harmony gives you 2% amp as long as they are 200 or more, which is totally reasonable for even a moderate player and is worth doing. And then later, if you have a free point, this is also a really good spot. I don't have it right now because I don't have a free point. Everything is spent more or less exactly where I want it. The other stuff you can take note of is in here, you can go up to Powerful Shield to get damage amp and damage dampening. You can go into the one-handed one to get, again, damage amp and stuff. It's only 3% amp as opposed to the other ones we're using 5 points to get 5. So it's not as good in here, but I definitely see people putting points in here. I wanted to bring it to people's attention. The other important one is up here in Spider. And I recommend using one of these when you're starting out. So as you get status effects, you want to be able to crowd control enemies. And putting points in here, any of these. So if you have additional lightning, you have additional cold, or you have additional physical, doing the outer ring, okay, so just the C shape on any of these will give you a ton of extra crowd control to stop enemies from moving. And it will give you 10% amp while that enemy is crowd controlled. And that's really good. And even when you get to Abyss Gate 30, where crowd control no longer works. It doesn't actually stop them. They still get the effect. And putting the points in here is 5 points to get 10% amp as long as it's working. Mine currently aren't in here because I'm in the process of doing some testing, so I normally have at least one of these. I also mistakenly said way back in the day that you can't have all three, but you totally can. It's just that I couldn't see them because the little bar where the status effects show up on the enemy only holds so many, and I thought it wasn't showing. But ignore that. So getting one of these is a really good idea for crowd control early on. The stone you're going to want here is the enhanced skill rune effect or the attack enhanced skill rune effect. Attack enhanced skill rune effect is going to give you ever so slightly more, but we're talking about 2 or 3% at max. It doesn't make much of a difference. Get either one and then get the standard fare on there. There is some other points in here we can talk about that are like potentially worth. Down in here to Poisoner is something that until you get to Abyss Gate is fairly strong because it's 5 points and it's going to give you max poison penetration. So instead of being at 60%, you're at 65 or 65 to 70. It's pretty good early on. The problem again becomes later on once you get to Abyss Gate, this stops being useful. If you want to use this to get your penetration up, it's definitely worth doing. The other one is going into the Path of Lightning for like shock effect and stuff. Definitely worth considering, but it's not super great. There's also the damage against blinded enemies, and since you're poison anyway, you're going to be blinding everything. That's potentially okay, but not really something that's great. Trait 8 is really, I only ever use it for, this is only in here because I'm doing some testing. This is not supposed to be here. This gives you additional physical because I don't have additional physical right now, but that's because my jewels are all messed up and we're working on something. The ones I do take in here, across the bottom in Shepherd to Rune Counselor, gives you some cooldown recover speed and some skill rune duration on skills that have duration. It's very great for cooldown. It's 3 points. You get some barrier and some stuff. And you want to make sure you get at least 3 points into 8 so that you can get a stone. Now, let's talk about the stone. There are no stones that are worth looking at because you'll never get them. There's a cast speed one. There's an attack speed one. It doesn't matter. They all require you to have 4 or more Cosmos nodes. And the Cosmos nodes are these ones over here. And it is not worth putting those points in. This used to be, way back in the day, before the big zodiac change, this used to be where people put a ton of their points. It was basically like 7 is now. And people put a lot of their points in there. And when they changed it, they didn't bother changing the activation for the stone. So the stone itself isn't going to do anything for you. But if you get 3 points in here and get to 1 sun node, you can get a stone, and then you can just get 3 good modifiers. Obviously, you can see here, I haven't got any yet, so it's not anything important, but that's something to keep in mind. Last of the standard ones is trait 9, and we've gone down straight over to here, and this is, again, a non-negotiable, because this gives you 2% chance to ignore enemy poison resist. Early on, not going to make much of a difference. Later on, very important. 5 points all the way over to there. The stone has penetration on it. You can get element penetration or regular penetration. Penetration is good. It's very important in the game. It is much less important when you get to Abyss Gate, so it's not as big of a deal, but standard thing. Whew. Okay, give me one more second. We're going to get into the last 3, the specialties. The specialties. So there are a few different places, different specialties you can go with. This is the one I've ended up, after a lot of testing, that I feel is the best one. So, we're starting with Brilliance, going up through Convert Mana into Damage Upon Spell Amplification and Convert Mana Limit. This is going to really help you deal with any kind of mana issue. With that said, it's only 10% amp. It's not amazing or anything, but the Convert Mana is really nice to have. We have a couple of different sources of getting mana in this build, but it's also a really high mana cost build, so going through here is a good idea. And then I go down to the barrier amplification. Now, there are a bunch of different places you can go in this instead of going to here. I like going through here because barrier, especially when you're talking about Abyss Gate, every level you go up in the Abyss Gate, your barrier gets cut down a lot. And having as much barrier as you possibly can is going to be really handy as you progress through it. If you don't care about survivability at all, you can go up into knowledge for cast speed amplification and some damage, or you could do 2 points into status effect and 2 points over to here, whatever you feel like. But I really feel like this is the way to go. You get armor, you get element resist, you get barrier amp. It's, in my opinion, the best one. You can definitely go other places, but that's what I recommend. The stone here, you're going to want any of the stat ones generally. Strength, Dex, Int. And there's honestly not a lot of, depending on the, what are they called? The emotion of the affixes you can get on these. There's not a lot of really good ones. I went with this one because it had armor amplification, and at one point I was having a huge problem with my armor. So this is a great place to get some armor amplification if you get a sadness trait here. There are ones that give flat damage that can also be good. Come here, you. Got a fluffy cat. But that's that. Into trait 2. There's a lot of places you can go here. I highly recommend Mana Absorb on spell hit. This is going to really cut down any kind of problems you were going to have. I definitely recommend it. Solar Activity, Damage upon Spell Amp, and Resource Cost Amp. And again, we're going to be running into a lot of things that are going to give us Resource Cost Amplification. The trait 5 one that I talked about, Knife Like Advanced, there's some other things we're going to be doing that are going to boost our cost. So having this to help offset this is really good. Sunspot is just really good because +2 projectile count is going to help us with our Plague Spike, getting nice coverage, and some damage taken dampening. If you want to go, instead of getting the projectiles or the damage taken dampening, and want to go more direct for damage, there's other places you can go. I mean, you really, when it comes right up to it, you can go up to here to get 200% damage. There's some up down here for some crit stuff. Again, this is what I've gone with where I am in the game. And then, of course, Area of Effect. Now, Area of Effect isn't super important. I know it looks like we took a lot of it, but really we took a lot of it because it's on the way to damage amplification, area damage amplification. These are definitely good, and they're, in my opinion, they're very worth taking, but there's also other ways you can go. Now, the one thing I do want to talk about here is this note here. 20% of damage taken as mana for every hit taken, and it amplifies your damage taken by 8%. So you take 20% less damage, and it just goes to your mana. And as long as your mana can get refilled very quickly, this is a really great way to mitigate a lot of damage. But keep in mind, if you are getting hit a lot, you won't be able to have enough mana to attack to get the mana back. It's really interesting, but this node can really nuke the hell out of your mana and then cause a lot of problems. It's worth it if you want to try it, but I would leave it unless you're really having survivability issues. The stone you're going to want here is damage dampening. I don't have one yet. I've run a million Constellation of times this season. I haven't got one. I don't know why. But you're going to want damage taken dampening, not element, not physical. You want damage taken dampening because it does all three. As for the nodes in it, again, there's nothing particularly amazing, but there's some damage dampening, some damage amp, and some whatever. Just find one that gives you something decent. Now, the last one here is something I really want to talk about. When I started this season, I was in here and I was taking Poison Element Enhancement and this Particle Increase. And there's a reason why, and maybe I'll set this up and do a damage test after to show you why. This does a crazy amount of damage, but you need to be a very specific distance from the enemy to make it do that damage. And especially when you get into the much higher stuff where you're moving around very quickly, it's really hard to get this to hit enemies consistently. And even though you can do it a crazy amount of damage with it, I don't recommend taking it. Again, I'm going to show a damage test at the end. So instead, we went over here into Waterfall. Pretty standard across the board stuff here. So we've got cast speed amplification, resource cost dampening, again, to help offset that damage, or the extra mana cost. And more importantly is this node right here, 1% element damage amplification for every 50 intelligence. Now, from what I know, okay, don't quote me on this, it stops at 1,000. So once you hit 1,000 int, this isn't going to give you more amp. But the int's still going to give you barrier and other good things, so it's not like it's bad. You can get up to 20% amp through this, and then the cast speed amplification is really nice as well. I think it's probably a no-brainer in my opinion. Up here, area damage amplification and area of effect. It's 10% for 2 points. Can't get better than that. And then over here, we've got barrier absorb on hit, which is really good for survival. Now, if you wanted to, if you didn't feel you need this cast speed amplification and your mana is really good, you can go up into the spell damage amplification and you'd probably get more out of it. And it's definitely something you should consider if you have a ton of cast speed. I definitely will if I get to a point where if I take this out right now, I always like to show the differences and things. So I'm at 5.0 cast speed. And if we go in here and I take out that 1 point, my cast speed drops to 4.5, which is not bad. And if I could get just a little bit more, which I'm planning on doing because I'm planning on getting this redone and getting cast speed in here, it'll probably make it to 5.0, and then I can make that change. And that'll give me more damage amp, which is something you want. And that's what I'm talking about with the build, that you're always going to have these options and trying to move things, especially in your Zodiac, as you make changes with your gear to keep yourself where you want. So that's the last trait here. And the stone is obviously element damage amplification. Damage amplification is also fine. You'll get slightly more. I think it's 0.3 more amp if you take element damage amp instead of damage amp. As for the stuff that you get in here, there's nothing particularly amazing that I've seen. Obviously, it's going to totally depend on the emotions that you get and the tiers of those emotions. So try to get something good. When it comes to your stat points, initially, you're going to want to put as many as you can into int. Again, because you're getting damage amp, you're getting survivability from this in terms of barrier, and you're getting mana. You're going to use enough strength that you can use your skills and enough dex that you can use your skills. And then once you get to a point where you can either need more armor or need more dodge or need more hit rate, you can move more points around. I've moved these here so that I have exactly 500. Now, for those that don't know, there are many bugs in this game. And if you look at my stats right now, you will see that my stats are at 525 and 521 for strength and dex. But you said you need 500. Why do you have extra? Are you gaining something from that? No, I'm not. I'm actually not gaining hardly anything from this. The reason that is there is a bunch of visual bugs in this game, and you can't actually see your own stats properly. You have to go to another character or ask a friend to look at your stats to see what your stats actually are. So I need 520 to get 500. So that's something to keep in mind if you're trying to hit any of those stat point things. Every 50 on here, but this is actually at 700. It's not 725. Something to keep in mind. So there is the Zodiac. Let's go into the gear. Now, I'm going to go through a couple of different things with the gear here. I'm not just going to show what I'm currently using, and I'm not just going to show the best in slot. I'm going to talk about what I do in terms of progression. So my initial wand is like a tier 33 or 34 or whatever it is, and the important things that you are going to want is additional lightning so that you can get shock effect, okay? Spell damage percent suffix, and gear critical rate. Those are all the most important ones, and I get those 4, and then I get whatever else I can. Try to get spell damage legendary, but generally I won't waste many reversions trying to get the spell damage because it's not going to make much of a difference early on. It's just going to get you going. You're not going to ancient early on, so that doesn't matter. Now we're going to talk about what I've got on here. The first thing is, if you don't know, is getting a base wand that isn't a minion wand for your sockets. Get your sockets. So you get a 35, you get a Vanished Starlight, and Vanished Starlight is very difficult to get. It only drops from plus 36 or higher. Hard mode can be very difficult to get one. If you buy it off the auction house, it's not that much though. So then we go with additional poison. Now, the reason I'm going additional poison here is because of penetration rather than getting any of the other ones, because I'm getting all of my other elements from jewels and other sources. So I got the additional poison here. Again, taking additional lightning here is totally fine. Taking additional physical or whatever other one that you don't have is totally okay. Now, I've gone with totem duration and totem effect so I can get skill rune effect. These two make a massive difference to how much my enhance effect gets. I am going to remember to link in the description a thing directly to how I made this wand if you want to get the same kind of wand. And then again, spell damage, gear critical rate, spell damage legendary. If you can, you get spell damage and flat spell, or spell damage percent, and then flat spell damage or flat poison damage. The ancients, you can get a ton of good stuff. I got additional fire, which is totally great. Any of the additionals are good. And then gear critical rate, you can also ideally get spell damage again. I think you can get spell damage again. No, you can get chance to ignore enemy element resist, which is what I wanted. But I got the gear critical rate and it put me where I wanted, so I took it. For jewels, you're going to want to make sure you have a star and a black. I am going to talk about jewels in a whole separate section, so we're going to skip over what I've got on there. Now, when it comes to specialized weapons, unique weapons and stuff, there's a reason we are using a wand, and there's a reason you would either use a wand, 2 wands, or a staff, and that is for vision shift. Vision shift is a huge component of this build. Not only is it a great movement skill, but it is also very important to your damage output, and I'll talk about that when I get there. So we're going to look at wands that are unique. There are a bunch. Early on, Wick of Mortal is a pretty solid, unique wand that you can get early on. I think I used this more or less until I made my good one. It's a great wand. It drops really easily. And then there's 2 good unique wands that are much more difficult to get. I don't have them, obviously. Aquila's Resonance is spectacular. It gives you a ton of other things. It gives specifically, it gives you barrier absorb on spell hit, which lets you change things in your specialty. It also gives you a bunch of damage amp and maximize damage, which is all very important stuff. And then there's Alyssa's Blessing, which is very strong when it comes to Abyss Gate, because it's got up to 15%, or not up to, sorry, it's got a flat 15% chance to ignore enemy element resist, which is really good, as well as just having great stats overall. So those 2, if you can get them, either of them is going to be really good. As for stabs, I honestly didn't look this season. I know there are some that are very good, so Expanding Boundary I know is good for certain builds. I don't know how good it would be for this build. I assume it would still be very good because it's still a really high attack and spell damage plus critical rate and all that stuff. I think it'd be really good. In terms of other uniques, I don't honestly know if there are many that are even worth looking at in terms of uniques, because the offhand, the shield that I have is so much better than having a staff that isn't super great. So when it comes to shields, because we're going to talk about that in the same breath that we're talking about the weapon, is best in slot, hands down, not even close, is Boreal's Heart. It gives you a crazy amount of barrier. Almost 3,000 flat barrier translates to a huge amount of barrier. It also gives you realization effect, although there is a bug, and the apply additional 300% to barrier when using a hit point potion does not work. It just doesn't work. Realization effect, barrier charge and stuff is great. It gives you a huge amount of damage amp. Very solid stuff. If you were going to make a shield, you would go with, again, pretty standard fare. You'd go the gear barrier percent, and then there's, depending on the shield base you use, you can get some totems, so you can get some skill rune effect, and you want the damage taken dampening, which in the description in the enchanting menu says element damage dampening. It's actually just damage dampening, as well as standard fare for suffixes and stuff. So if you're going to go 2 wands, do 2 of these or 1 of the uniques or whatever. If you're going to get if you have access to the shield, I highly recommend it. It is a huge amount of barrier, as well as just a lot of damage amp and stuff. So that's the weapon and offhand. Let's move on to helmet. Okay, helmet. Again, the base here should either be armor, dodge, or armor, dodge. And it's because you can get a lot. So you get your standard stuff here, and this should be it's the first piece I craft every season is my helmet. And it's because you can get a lot from a helmet early on, and it'll hold you over for a very long time until you can get access to stuff to make a better one. Now, even the one I'm using right here is not a super duper endgame version, because this is still left over from my armor problem that I had talked about. So you get armor or dodge, whatever one you have less of, or again, armor dodge. You're going to get armor percent, armor flat, or whatever version of that. And the other important one here, the most important, is the enhanced skill rune cooldown recovery speed. And making this helmet is very easy. Again, pretty sure I have a video to this exact helmet that I'm going to link in the description if you want to watch that. And then the suffixes, you want critical damage, enhanced skill rune effect. That's what I start with, and because that's very easy to build. Now, in a really super optimal version, you would have enhanced skill rune recovery speed. I forget exactly what it is, but it's some kind of totem, and then some kind of totem, both of which you would turn into skill rune effect. Then critical damage would stay as critical damage, enhanced skill rune effect, and attack enhanced skill rune duration. It is a massive boost to your attack enhance, and if you build it that way. But even with this version of it, with the gear armor dodge, it's giving me a huge amount of armor dodge and still giving me a lot of damage, which is great. The the legendaries, gear armor dodge. If you need the gear armor dodge, you can also get, I forget what the other prefix is. And there's a couple of good legendary prefixes to look at here. Again, I went with hit rate as the suffix because eventually hit rate becomes an issue. The ancients are where the problem lies, in that I haven't made a new one. So I happen to get the 2 that I wanted in terms of ancients. So damage amp, if your poison resist is 250 or above, very easy to hit with all the other gear that we're using, because we're getting tons and tons of poison resist. So 10.2 damage amp, poison damage amp, and then 7.6 attack enhanced skill rune effect amp. And again, I already talked about amp in the zodiac. This is like 40% damage amp right here. It's very hard for me to give up this helmet and craft a new one, knowing that I will need to hit this again with the ancient, and ancients are going to be the hardest things to hit in the game. So hitting this sucks. This is the most important thing, because it makes such a difference later if you have a lot of skill rune effect. And again, we've got skill rune effect. Basically every piece of my gear has skill rune effect somewhere. So if you can get that, it's really important. It's hard to get. It's also why I don't have a second jewel slot, because I made this before I learned that you could swap gear to get, you could do partial transfers to get the sockets that you want. But yeah, there's the helmet. Now, there are a few really good options for unique helmets, and I'm going to talk about those quick. Number 1 is Preservation of Reason. Spectacular helmet. I actually happened to get one this season for the first time since it came out. I couldn't be more ecstatic. Why am I not wearing it? Because it is in my Lacrima. I would be wearing it otherwise. Huge amount of armor and dodge, element resist, max element resist, which is going to make you very tanky, and seal effect, which is going to affect your attack enhance seals, and they're going to end your defensive ones too, so it's really good. Skill rune cooldown recovery, skill rune duration, damage amp upon using an enhanced skill, all spectacular stuff. Unfortunately, it gives you hit point amplification, which we don't really care about, but it's not bad. The other one we want to talk about here is Spica's Wisdom. It takes away strength and dex, but overall it is a spectacularly strong helmet. Up to 60% damage on spell, enhanced skill rune effect amplification. Again, that amplification very important. And it gives you hyper focus effect, which is the barrier recovery on attack hit, barrier recovery on spell hit. So again, if you're getting that, you can take stuff out of your special. This is a spectacular helmet. I'd love to get a copy of this thing. The other one to talk about here is Boreal's Arc. I'm not going to go through all the stuff because there's a lot, but it's another really good helmet if you can get those. Okay, so yeah, those are the three. The potentially not bad one is the Aphros Veil. It doesn't do a ton of things for us, but it's not a bad helmet if you get it and you don't know how to craft things really well. It gives you a ton of element resist, it gives you critical damage and a bunch of other stuff. It's not spectacular, but it's not bad. Okay, moving on to necklace. Now, making a good necklace, crafting and enchanting, you can make some really powerful necklaces with, there's 3 different suffixes that you can get that are all powerful. One is damage amp chance on hit. One is damage amp when you use an attack enhance. And the third suffix is like enhanced skill cooldown. Or no, it's just cooldown, which is global, which is really good. And then you've got prefixes, you've got poison damage and flat poison damage percent and flat poison damage. And then if you want to get really bonkers, you can try to get the pulverize effect, which as long as you cause physical damage, gives you 10% amp. You can make this thing and it's really powerful. It's also really hard to make one of those. You can make crummy versions of it with just getting some of the suffixes and some of the prefixes, and it'll be fine. But hands down, absolute best in slot in this build is Transcendent Surging Knowledge. Not even close. And there's a bunch of reasons why. It's got a huge amount of flat poison damage. It's got additional poison. It's got up to 10% maximization chance, which means triple max chance. Really strong. And then it's got powerful effect. And powerful effect is if you are standing in a poison area, the skill poison area. And that's where we're going to talk about in the Runeboard. We're going to talk about Vision Shift, and that's specifically why we use Vision Shift and not anything else. So on top of the stuff you're getting up here, if you're standing in a poison area, you get 80% critical damage, 50% maximized damage, 20% poison damage amp, damage taken 15% decrease, as well as 20 mana on hit and 40% resource cost damping. It is massive to have this along with the other stuff. Now the problem is, if you don't have Vision Shift and have it set up properly, activating poison area on your own manually is a pain in the ass and is not really worth it. But if you have it, this is spectacular. Now, there are other necklaces that are worth getting along the way. I always like to talk about the stuff that you can use along the way. The standard one is Capri's Heart. Solid necklace. There's absolutely nothing wrong with it. It gives you stats, it gives you crit damage, hit rate, chaos resist, and additional fire up to 35%, which is a lot, as well as some item drop rarity, which is really nice. The other good option is Circulating Life. Really difficult to get. I've never actually seen this drop. And of course, there is the gold coin of the beginning, which is specifically in here for item drop rarity and Runemaster XP on kill. It's not good for combat, but it is good for other things. Not necessarily worth wearing. The regular Surging Knowledge is okay. And if you have your poison area set up on your movement, it's not bad. It's pretty solid across the board. It's definitely worth using. It's not nearly as good as the Transcendent version. Definitely use a selection box or something to get the the Transcendent Surging Knowledge. It's absolutely best in slot. Next up, we have shoulders, and shoulders are really good for solidifying your defenses. Initially, I had this set here, or a lower version of it, where you will get chaos resist when cold, fire, lightning, and poison are 100 or more, and then you can get one of 3 things when you craft it. You can get barrier amp, armor amp, or dodge amp. I use this piece. So if I needed armor, I built an armor version. If I needed dodge, I built a dodge version. And then I used the 3 prefixes to boost that to where I needed it. Obviously, on this version, I needed armor. And then I got gear armor flat, and then barrier amp because I didn't actually need the armor that much. Outside of that, you can get skill rune, or the totem, and then skill rune effect, item drop rarity, chaos resist. Shoulders, in terms of crafting, are not particularly strong. Even if you make them there's not a lot of good options. So they're generally just used for a defensive purpose. When it comes to getting one that is damage output, you have to look to uniques, and there are a disgusting amount of very strong unique shoulders, and hitting any of them will be spectacular. So the ones we should talk about, the Comet's Perch, okay? It's, long story short, when all three of your stats are 500 or more, it gives you a ton of stuff, as well as giving you the sharpness effect, which we don't have elsewhere. Or wait, no, hold on. This one doesn't give you sharpness effect. I am wrong. It only gives you sharpness effect. It doesn't actually give you the sharpness effect. Great shoulder, spectacular, better off in a Lacrima than on you, but if you get it, you should absolutely be using it. It's very solid. The Akuben's Thunderbolt is another one that is not bad and not too hard to get. Tons of armor, immune to shock, damage amp against shocked enemies, and it changes Thunderbolt's cycle so that it's twice as fast, as well as giving it a bunch of area of effect. Now, Thunderbolt is something we use in terms of farming, but if we're trying to push, we're not actually using Thunderbolt. But these shoulders are really good if you're going to be, if you don't have a better shoulder. If you look at this in terms of just damage output, it's going to give you, I think it's up to 18%. Yeah, up to 18% damage amp against shocked enemies, which is going to be every enemy you hit, and is very worth it, as well as it gives you a good chunk of armor and stuff, especially if you quality it. It's not a great shoulder, but it's better than crafting a crappy one, is the long and short of it. The one I'm currently wearing, which is a spectacular shoulder, is Afro Story. It gives you everything you want. It gives you sharpness effect, which then we can make use of it elsewhere. It gives you damage taken dampening, maximization chance, maximization damage, based on you having at least 5 ancient pieces of gear on, which are the purple ones. Okay, so I have exactly 5, so I can make use of it. It's not best in slot, but it is very strong if you can get your hands on it. And we've got, I think, 2 more to look at. Yep, go back. So the Epulat of Eternity, is the opposite of Afro Story. It requires you to have holy pieces, and it's going to give you a bunch of stuff. It's very strong. It's probably just about on par with Afro Story, as long as you're using all uniques. And the granddaddy, the big one, the best piece in the game, is Leo's Animosity. I don't like this piece of gear because it takes any interest out of builds. It's a wildly powerful piece of gear that gets weaker for every 10 runes you add. So if you have 9 runes on your rune board, it is at full power, and it's giving you a crazy amount, up to 60% maximization chance, among other things. So that means 60% of the time you're doing triple maximized damage with one piece of gear. It's insane. As well as a bajillion other really good things. And then you get less on it every time you put 10 runes on. So you have 9 or 19, and that's the build. I'm not going to bother talking about it beyond that. If you get it and you want to go that route, there are tons of videos that are not from me that are about this thing, and maybe I'll make one about it anyway. But yeah, spectacular, absolute best in slot piece of gear. If you're trying to really kick the game's ass, that's the one you want. Next up, we have belts. And before I even talk about mine, this is another position where I don't use a particular piece because I don't like it. And much like Leo's Animosity, it is absolutely infinitely better than what I am currently using. And it is a potion belt. I'm not going to go into it too much. Again, there's tons and tons of other videos about this belt. And long story short, you get 4 different modifiers that are all enhanced potion effect. And then you run a ton of enhanced potions. You run a damage one, and a cast speed one, and an armor one, and a dodge one. And then your stats go through the roof, and you don't have to worry about a whole bunch of other stats. If you want to go that route, absolutely do. It is way better than what I am using. So, with that said, why am I using this? Because I think it's really tacky to use potions. Nothing against anyone who does it. Absolutely go crazy. But we're going to talk about the belt that I'm using. So, we're using a very hard to make belt overall, and it's not even necessarily that good. We want the totem effect, or the totem hit points, so we can go skill rune effect. We've got some barrier amplification, some regular barrier, some minus resource cost, which I'm not necessarily sure I need anymore, but at the time I did. This is a great place to get it. And then the rest is just stats, so that I can get myself to the 500s. There's nothing really special about it. Now, again, Potion Belt is best in slot, absolutely, but they are very difficult to make on your own. You can buy them generally a little later in the season at kind of half power for very cheap. But if you want to talk about unique belts that are available, there is one that does stand out, if I go to the right thing, which is the Overture of Grace. Is a baby version of a potion belt. It's something, if you want to go potions, it's not bad, but it really just does some potion effect and duration. Outside of that, it doesn't do anything else for us. The other one we do want to talk about is Girth of Harmony. It is a hit point belt, which isn't great for us because 4 of the things on it are hit points, but it does give a huge amount of cooldown recovery speed and enhanced skill rune effect, as well as sharpness effect if you're getting sharpness effect from a different source, because we can't get it natively. It's actually pretty good. Really, it's probably better for me to use this, but I don't want to give up the one I'm using. It's not necessarily particularly hard to get. They do give it away in selection boxes a lot. It's very solid just for these 2 modifiers, just for the enhanced skill rune cooldown recovery speed and enhanced skill rune effect. That on its own is very strong. Yeah, that's it for belts. Let's move on. Next up is chess piece. When it comes to chess piece, you're going to have more or less the same on this, unless you want to get really insane with it. And the really insane version's not that much better. So again, you want a T35 barrier-only chess piece, and your prefixes, you want flat barrier and barrier percent. I did not particularly great rolls because I made this one way back, and I haven't made a new one. Damage taken dampening is totally up to you. If you want the extra damage taken dampening, I highly recommend it. It's a great place to get a huge amount of damage taken dampening, but obviously if you don't care about damage taken dampening, don't worry about it. You want the +3 spell damage skill rune level. Damage levels to your main skills do a lot of extra damage. Now, if you didn't want to take the damage taken dampening and still wanted to do a 4 prefix one, you could take enhanced skill rune amplification. It gives +2 or +3 levels, I'm not sure. The thing is, it doesn't give much more damage. I'm pretty sure I have a video on this particular piece, and with that, it talks about how much you get from an enhanced skill rune level, and it's honestly not a lot of damage amp. It's really not worth taking up a slot on this, in my opinion anyway, so I went with the damage taken damage. Chaos resist suffix, because chess pieces give a huge amount of it, and if you can get like a tier 14, I think it's 65%, which is a lot, or 65 chaos resist, which is a lot. And then reflect damage, which we turn into element damage amplification. And what I want to do, which I haven't bothered to do because it doesn't make much of a difference, is get this and then high craft the percent barrier so that I can get more barrier. Okay? With your legendaries, there are 2 things you want. One, which is barrier percent. It's exactly like this one. It's going to make a huge damage or huge difference to your survivability. And the other one is plus to spell damage skill rune level. Again, a lot of damage just by leveling up your skills past their normal end. When it comes to the ancients, it is barrier amp and barrier amp. One is just straight barrier amp, and the other is barrier amp and hit point dampening. Again, we don't care about hit points. You can get, I think it's 30% barrier amp through this, which is a huge amount of barrier. I've had very little luck, as you can see, hitting it, but that's what you would want. When it comes to chest pieces that are unique, the problem with taking a unique... I'm going to keep hitting the wrong thing, aren't I? The problem with hitting a unique chest piece is that you want to make sure you get barrier, as much barrier as you can from this. There's not a lot of really good high barrier chest pieces. I think there's only the one, and it's this one here. And I am going to talk about this thing because it is important to the build. So the Transcendent Twilight Veil gives you a bunch of barrier and some other barrier stuff. But the important thing is right here. Barrier increase upon using Cold Arm. Now, when we get to the Runeboard, I'm going to talk about it more. But if you don't have this on, you should have it in your Lacrima. And if you don't have it in your Lacrima, you should have it as a distortion stone. This will make a massive difference to your barrier. Again, if we look at my barrier right now, I'm at 104,000. And if we go into the training area here, and I turn on my cold armor, I go up to 186,000. That's 80,000 extra barrier. That's nearly double. So it is very important to the build that you get that Twilight effect. On top of that, if you take fatal damage, you will actually get filled to 100% barrier, and that can happen every 90 seconds, which is really nice when you make a slip up during something. There's not a good chess piece overall that's a unique that is worth using as is. You really want to craft your own and get as much stuff as you can. Next up, we have our rings, and while you can make some very strong rings, for the most part, you're just going to want uniques. I could talk about the modifiers that you could put on them and what else, and if you set them up properly, you can make some really strong rings, but I don't recommend doing it. There's reasons why you would, especially if you have enough crit rate, like a really ridiculous amount of crit rate. The Caster's Refraction would stop being as effective. With that said, Caster's Refraction is going to be almost certainty that you're going to be wearing this thing. So get it from a selection box, get it from however you need it, and we're using it for this flat critical rate. So we add this, and that's going to help us get to our 600 or 700 flat critical that we need to get to have 100% crit rate. The other stuff on here is obviously very good. Damage amp, resource cost dampening, critical damage. The whole bottom of it doesn't matter. But these 4 modifiers are generally going to be worth it, especially if you can get a Dawnstone for rings, because it can give you, if you get beyond 15%, it's a 2 extra flat critical, which is really nice. You can also put this in your Lacrima if you get a unique ring slot and get the extra from that. It's definitely worth doing. And then maybe you have to consider using a crafted ring. And if you really want a video on crafted ring for this build, let me know and I'll make one, but I'm not going to bother here. The other one you're absolutely going to want is Transcendent Akuben's Thunder. Again, it's just spectacular across the board. Damage amp, critical rate, enhanced skill rune recovery speed, enhanced skill rune effect, mana on hit, it gives you stats, it gives you chaos resist, it gives you dodge. The whole bottom part doesn't matter because you're not going to use Strike of Persistence, or that's what it's actually called, Persistent Strike. So don't worry about this part, but all this top part is definitely worth using it. The other alternative, if you are not going to use the critical ring, okay, which I, again, really recommend using unless you already have your crit at a very high level, is the... I already forgot the name of it. I swore to myself I wasn't going to forget the name. I did. Where are you, other ring? The Band of Certainty, Transcendent Band of Certainty. It's really solid. It's nothing special, but it's really good. Maximize damage, hit rate, and damage amp if your stats are 200 or more, which they should be. Very solid ring. There is the new Ring of Amplified Power. Can't tell you too much about this ring. I know it's really strong, and it's weird because it forces you to intentionally miss every so often so that you can get the first one sets off the second buff, sets off the third buff, and then all the stuff happens. Again, I don't know much about the ring itself. I've never really used it. I'm sure it's quite strong, but I don't know. I don't have a way to test it because I don't have one to see if it's better than, say, the Band of Certainty or the Caster's Refraction or whatnot. Again, it's really not worth trying to craft a ring. Not that you couldn't make a ring that is stronger than one of these two. It's just way, way more work for marginally better results. So just get, ideally, these 2 rings from selection boxes and whatnot, and then move on. Next up, we have gloves. Now, gloves are covering my dodge rate, quite a bit of my dodge rate, and I went with the T35s for the maximized. There are ones that you can use at lower levels to do cast speed as they're implicit that are totally fine and absolutely worth using. I didn't need the cast speed as I'm already at 5.0, so I went the little tiny bit of maximized damage because that's what we want in the end game. Most of what we have here is specifically for cast speed. The cast speed prefix, the cast speed amplification suffix. Now, if you aren't already at a very high crit rate, you can also get a crit rate suffix here. I don't need it because I'm already at my crit rate, so there's no point in having it. I only went with the gear dodge rate percent here rather than the flat because I don't feel like I needed it, as I gain more levels from my my gear slot upgrades from the Abyss Gate. Obviously, you can do a lot here. The flat poison damage prefix is really good. There is a cheater exploit version that you can get 2 stacks of this. Don't do it because it'll get you banned. You're not supposed to do that. Maximize damage or critical damage. I went with knockback chance here to get more critical damage because you can't have critical damage and maximize damage, but I wanted them both, and this is how you do that. Again, I have a video that I will link in the description about this glove because I did a video for it. Again, the legendaries, we went with gear dodge rate. I got critical rate. I would have rather had critical damage, but I got critical rate, which is fine. Ancients, I got critical damage, and then damage from elite dampening. I forget what the other one we could have got here was, but damage from elite dampening is not bad. There's not much else to say there. There is a unique that is debatable whether it's worth using. And it's a really good glove, but whether it's worth using or not is debatable. The Hamal's Verdancy glove is armor dodge base, cast speed amplification, chance to deal double, chance to deal triple, maximize damage. The only issue here is you don't get a lot of cast speed amplification from this. And if you're having trouble getting to your cast speed cap at 5.0, this isn't going to necessarily do great. It's a solid glove. It's a really good glove if you get it. And then there's the Aquila's Sunlight, which again is not necessarily great, but it can be a really good glove in the meantime. Tons of dodge rate because it's got both of the things. It's got damage taken decrease, which is great. It doesn't have cast speed. It's only got attack speed, but it's got skill rune cooldown dampening, skill rune duration, which can be okay. Again, it's an okay glove in the meantime. It's not what we want, but it definitely is solid in the meantime if you happen to get one from a selection box or something to tide you over until you can make a better glove. I think we've only got one more piece. We do, and it's the boots. Okay, now, you can make some very strong boots. Boots are actually surprisingly strong in terms of the damage you can get out of a pair of boots. But the Akuben's Garden is going to be best in slot for what it's worth. It gives you a huge amount of move speed. It gives you a really solid chunk of barrier, which is not something you typically get on boots. On boots, the defensive bonuses are not great, and you can make a really strong pair that you use an armor barrier base and you do a bunch of stuff. I have videos about it if you want to search those up, but this thing's just better. It's going to give you like 662 barrier. Now, obviously that changes, but that's half of what I have on my chest piece, which is nuts for a boot to have you that much. It's got a huge amount of cast speed amplification, which is great. It's got up to, I think, 16% poison damage amp. Yeah, 16% poison damage amp. Immune to venom, which doesn't really matter in the later stuff. But though it's a really good boot. It doesn't do a ton, but it does the things we want very well. Now, you can do, people get confused by this poison cloud thing, and they think that chance to trigger additional hits is for all of the things, and it's not. It's only for poison cloud, and we're not using poison cloud because it's not very good. But the boots themselves are absolutely best in slot. Again, if you do want to look at a pair of boots, here, hold on. Actually, let me show you an average, not an average, a very strong pair of boots that you would make for this build. Again, maybe I'll remember to put the link for these. But you can get strike damage, you can get area damage as well. I didn't get it on this particular pair, but you could get strike damage, area damage, move speed, damage taken dampening, skill rune effect, attack enhanced skill rune effect, and then sharpness effect on boots. And that's a lot. You can get a whole lot of stuff. This isn't even a particularly well crafted pair or anything. I could have got so much more out of this. but I was still learning. So boots are really strong. Okay, let's go through a couple of the extra slots and the Lacrima, and then we'll get into the Runeboard. So the last few actual gear slots to talk about are your Soulstone and your Abyss Stones. Now, Soulstone, there are two ways to go with this. A tier 1, level 1 Ilias Blessing, okay? I did a whole video on why you shouldn't level up an Ilias Soulstone. So long story short, get an Ilias Soulstone at level 1. And then if you get another one, and you can get either double or trip or 2 or some combination of a damage amp and a maximized or critical or something, and then you can level it up to level 30 and it could potentially outperform Ilias Blessing. But it's so much easier just to get a Soulstone with Ilias Blessing. They are virtually free. You can see here that on this character I have it at level 30 because I didn't learn this until afterward. But yes, Ilias Blessing gets weaker the higher as you get to level 11 and level 21. So get a level 1 Ilias Soulstone. For your 2 Dawn Stones, Ring is going to be best because it's going to affect 2 pieces of gear, so you're going to get more stats. And then generally what you're going to go for, I just realized I'm on the wrong character, is either your wand or your strongest piece. So if you had, say, Afro's Story, get a armor shoulder, or what is it, a strength shoulder. The second Dawn Stone is really just whatever you can get to fill the whatever your best piece is. I can't tell you which one is going to be best because I don't know what gear you've got. So get whatever you can. Generally, weapon is a really good place to go if you can get it. So wand or staff, depending on what you're using. And then your Distortion Stone. I'll actually go to the right character for this one. There are tons of ways you can go to try and get more damage. But what I recommend more than anything is if you happen to get a Distortion Stone, get the one for cold armor. Now, I mentioned this earlier when I was talking about the chest piece that you want a copy of somewhere in your setup, whether you're wearing it, whether it's in your Lacrima, or you get the Distortion Stone for it, is the Transcendent Twilight Veil. And again, it's purely for the barrier gain on cold activation armor. So if you use cold armor, you're going to get a huge amount. Again, I'm gaining almost double my barrier by having this. And I really recommend getting this as your Distortion Stone if you get a selection box for it, because it's going to make such a big difference for one thing. It's going to make a huge difference for your survivability. And there's not really any good ones that are going to give us damage output. There's ones that are going to give us some damage output, but I don't feel like it's worth losing half of your survivability just to get a little more damage. So I really recommend that. With your Lacrima, I always like to talk about Lacrima, but Lacrima is always going to be whatever you have access to. People will say, what's the best one? And I could tell you what the best one is, but you have to be able to get the gear to go in it. You have to be able to get that stone, and it's hard enough to get. So I always like to talk about just options for things that are good. Obviously, any of the uniques that I talked about that were really good on your character are going to be really good in your Lacrima. I talked about this helmet, the Preservation of Reason. I had a helmet slot for a unique, so I put this in because it's really strong. If you had one for any of the good uniques, you could put it in here and get the stuff. The one thing you always want to make sure of is that you check what stuff is going to actually transfer. So if you look at a helmet piece, or look at this piece, okay, if I hit the little Lacrima button, it'll show that these are all good. But this is grayed out. If you see something that's grayed out when you hit this little button on a piece, you're not going to get that thing. Some pieces of gear are really good on, and they don't get much if you put them in the Lacrima because they lose quite a bit of the stuff on them. In terms of generally accepted to be the best stuff, two-handed weapon is almost always going to be best because you can get so much stuff. Again, I will put a thing in the description of this Lacrima's building so that you can look at it. So two-handed weapon's always going to be good. One-handed weapon is always going to be good. Offhand is going to be really good because you can do quiver and get a lot of damage on that. And then basically any other piece that you can get a lot of stuff on. Necklaces, rings. In this case, I got boots and I got a huge amount of stuff that I wanted. Any piece that will give you a lot of stuff that actually transfers is going to be good in Lacrima. So don't get too bogged down in, I have to have the best possible thing. Get some stuff in there, get what you can, and then come back later and you can always revise this when you get it better. Okay, last up for gear, we have jewels. Now, jewels are really important, especially now that we have access to extra jewel slots. So, the basic rule here is you're going to want a star on your weapon and all your jewelry. So, your both rings, belt, and amulet, okay? And then everything else gets a black jewel. On top of that, you can get extra slots on all of these. And for this build, oddly, best in slot is going to be red. Now, the reason a red jewel is going to be best as opposed to a white jewel is purely for attack enhanced skill rune. So if we look at, of course I pick one that doesn't have it. So when we look at this, I've got 14.9 enhanced skill rune effect, and that's on a 7, and it's not very well rolled. If you get a bunch of these, you can get like 180% skill rune effect across all your gear. Getting that is really good, and they're super easy to get, and getting those extra slots is really important. So every extra red slot you can get, you want to fill with this. Now, the other ones you do want to talk about, obviously, are the white jewels. Occasionally, you might get a piece that you get a white jewel. I like to use the white jewels for 1, chaos resist, and 2, other stuff. In this case, right now, I just realized I don't even have a jewel in that yet. Right now, I know I have a white jewel somewhere. Belt? The weapon? What is even going on? I know I have another white jewel. Don't I? No, I took it out because it was on my shoulder. I use it for cast speed. There's a jewel. There you are. Refraction. It gives you a little bit of cast speed and damage upon spell. Outside of that, white jewels are really only good for resistances. They don't do much for us in this build for damage. There's a couple that you can use for armor and dodge and different things and dampening, but they're really not worth having late game when a red jewel is easier to get where you want and will make it that much stronger. The problem is, obviously, you do want a high jewel score. Ideally, if you can get to 1600, that's the goal. And that's harder to do with red jewels than white jewels. Again, I'm using a white jewel intentionally because I wanted to make sure that my chaos resist is in a safe place when I go into Abyss Gate. So I'm using 1 white jewel for that. Outside of that, white jewels are not particularly good. When it comes to black jewels, there are a whole bunch of great optional things that you can use, and I'm going to talk about them across the board. And some of these are things that you'll use for a while and then you'll drop, and then other ones are ones you're going to want to keep in the thing for the whole time. So we've got the standard is damage amplification. Tier 3 damage amplifications go up to 3.4 and then can have 9 times 3, so 2.7 extra, so you can get 7% damage amp on a black jewel. And you can have those in every slot on your gear. And you should, as many as you can. Problem is, it's hard to get rolls that are good. It's hard to get tier 3s. So some of them you're going to fill with other stuff. And the good ones, Tenacious Personality is a solid one. Enhanced Skill Rune Duration, Enhanced Skill Rune Cooldown Recovery Speed. Keeping in mind that named jewels, you can only use 1 of. People always ask if it can overlap with the Zodiac, and it absolutely can, but it can't overlap with another of the same jewel. Knife-like Advance is another one. Hold on, where are you? Neck. So Knife-like Advance is a very good one. Attack Enhanced Skill Rune Effect Amplification and Resource Cost Amplification. Can't recommend it enough. Again, this on its own is like 30% damage amp with my setup. Very strong. Elaborate Attack is something that I currently have on that gives you flat critical chance. Again, we already talked about it in trait 5. If you need this, it's really good. Once you don't need it, it's not much because it's only 37% critical damage. I'm going to trade this out for a black damage amp jewel in the very near future. Quick Whisper is something that I'm on the wrong ring. Nope, yeah, it's this ring. Quick Whisper. Cast speed and cast speed during shout skill effect. I need this cast speed right now to bring me to 5.0. Once I get the cast speed on my Holy on the ring, I will be able to drop this and replace it with more damage amplification because it's really just there to get me to 5.0. But it's something that you should pay attention to. Tenacious Personality. I think I already talked about it. Yes, because I talked about it over there. Very solid. I'm going to keep it even though damage amp might potentially be better because this gives you enhanced skill rune cooldown duration and it gives you duration and cooldown. Just the thing you want with your attack enhanced skill. We're going to talk about it more later. And Empty Senses is, again, debatable whether it's good. I used it purely because I was rolling that jewel and I got to the end and hadn't hit anything good, so I took this one. It's definitely going to be replaced with a damage amp jewel. Early on, getting some area of effect is nice. Once you get to a certain point, area of effect stops being effective, and I'd rather just have the damage amp. Now, I want to talk about the star jewels have a bunch of good ones, and you're just going to try to get 5 of those. So 1 on the weapon and 1 on the others. The 4 standard ones are Flame Boundary, Display of Lightning, Experienced Craftsman, and Frost Shelter. Okay, and those are exactly what they sound like. They're all additional damage for those types. As long as you are getting all 5 types of damage in the much, much later version when we end up talking about the Runemaster points, you can get 10% damage amp for each of those elements. That's 50% damage amp just by having those, as well as getting additional damage, which is very strong. The other ones you want to look for are Annihilation, which is here, Area of Effect, and Area Damage Amp. You can get pretty high on both, and it's flat area of effect, which is great, and then area damage amplification is very strong too. And the most important one, the one I don't currently have, is Thirst for Elements. Much like its counterpart in the Zodiac, it gives you a chance to ignore enemy element resist at a pretty high rate, so it's very worth it on top of just damage amplification. I think it's 3% or something when you roll it all the way up, but it's still very strong. Now, there are other star jewels that are okay, but because you can only get 5, generally those are the ones I would recommend. So, Flame Boundary, Display of Lightning, Experienced Craftsman, Frost Shelter, Thirst for Elements, and Annihilation. 5 of those 6 is what I would pick. Outside of that, green jewels, blue jewels are really not worth using at all. Obviously, you can use them early on. Blue you can use for like mana conservation issues. Green you can use for crit rate and damage early on, but they're going to fall off very quickly comparative to the other stuff. Whew. Okay, so that's it for all of the gear. Let's finally look at that rune board. Okay, the rune board. Now, when I do these builds, people always say, what's the absolute best? What's the best on this? And the problem is, it totally depends on your whole character to whether something is good or not versus something else. Now, some of them are easy to calculate. You look at something like Strike, you add up all the strike damage, and then you look at something like Concentrated Area and you add up all the strike damage, and you see which one has a higher strike damage amplification. You go, that's the better one, obviously. But there's some that only are better based on other factors. So I'm going to talk about the 2 different skills that I'm using and why I'm using what I'm using, even though there might be better options. And some of these are actually potentially going to get changed by literally by the end of the video because I'm going to do a ton of testing after this because I'm working on optimizing this build before I finish the season. So let's talk about our main skill, Plague Spike. Plague Spike is not here to do damage. Plague Spike is here to debuff enemies as much as possible so that our other skill can do the damage. So, Plague Spike with the Verity Awakening, and the Verity Awakening is just the element damage amplification. There are two other options, obviously the Pierce count and the projectile count, and there's something to be said about taking the Origin with the projectile count to get you better coverage or whatever. But honestly, turning down 26% element damage amplification is hard. So Verity is the way you go. Even though it's not in here to do damage, I do feel like this is the best choice. Now on here, we've got two sort of non-negotiables, which is Piercing with the Source Awakening. The Source just gives us an extra pierce. You could also go damage per pierces or whatever, but again, we're not looking for damage out of the skill. We're looking for utility, and the extra pierce is very nice. And the other is Parallel Multi-Shot, again with Source Awakening for powerful multi-shot effect, so we get +2 projectiles. We lose a little bit of projectile damage, but again, we don't care because it's here for the utility. Now, you could go with the Origin if you're having resource cost problems. You could go with Verity for the damage amplification, but again, it's not going to make much of a difference on this skill. Now, these are here purely for coverage and clearance. Because it's parallel multi-shot, all the shots are going forward, and they're going to hit enemies that are standing side by side. You're going to get a ton of overlap on the effect, which is going to cause a lot of extra damage. You could pick better things in terms of damage, but these are here and they do perfectly with the utility that it is designed to do. The other three on here are things that are all debatable, and we're going to talk about some other options after I talk about these three. Now, this first one is something that PT Gaming, which if you have not watched any of PT Gaming stuff, he knows this game inside and out. Great guy. I assume he's a great guy. I've never really talked to him, but he knows his stuff in terms of this game and brought this to my attention. Decreased duration seems so weird here, but it is incredibly powerful. So what it does is gives you duration dampening. So the effect that the debuffing effect this gives, the duration is lower, but you're hitting 5 times a second. So the duration doesn't matter, but it gets skill rune effect, and that skill rune effect directly affects these two modifiers here, which is big. Element resist dampening and poison damage taken amplification. And if we look at the numbers, so I'm at 37% on both of them. If I take this off, I go down to 28%. It's 9% more damage amp. Or not damage amp, it's damage dampening. So they take more damage from the effect. And it doesn't work the same way as damage amplification does, so it's really strong. And overall, it's a really good thing because, again, we're not looking for damage. We're looking for something that debuffs the enemy so that our other skill can do damage, and this does that really well. I've done a lot of testing with it. It is very strong. Now, the other two are things that I'm still in the process of testing. The additional poison damage is always going to be solid. It's always going to be in the running for whether it's worth using or not. I'm going to be testing other things, and I don't know why I didn't bother testing them before this, mostly because I'm just burned out and tired and wanted to get working on the video. But it's very solid. Now, obviously, we can't use element damage amplification here because the Verity Awakening makes sure we can't use it. So there are other options here we're going to talk about after this. Hi, you coming over? Hi, fluffy guy. Are you going to help? Oh, you're so cute. And the other one here we've got is the maximized damage increase. Maximized damage increase is something that is wildly situational. If you do not have a very high maximized damage chance, this is going to be a very crappy link rune for you. Also, if you have low critical damage, this will also be a crappy link rune for you. This is only good if you have a high maximized damage chance and a high critical damage, because it's going to take 100% of your critical damage, which is just 100%. It's not like all of your critical damage. People misread this and get confused. So you're going to get strike damage amplification and a bunch of maximized damage. And maximized damage is really strong, and any of the values that you see here, you have to multiply it by 3, because when you do triple maximized, this is the initial maximized damage, and you're doing 3 times that. So the number comes up higher. Maximized damage goes up to 1,300%, or is it 1,000%? It's 1,000%. Critical goes to 1,300%. So this is a really strong link rune if you have those 2 factors. If you don't, you're going to have to go with one of the other ones we're going to talk about. And the last one on here is obviously our spell on spell hit. Now, I, this season, went bananas and purchased this for myself, and it cost me like 20,000 rubies I had stockpiled from being a partner creator. The regular one does fine, but this is leagues better. The problem is, it is virtually impossible to farm in-game. You can only ever get this thing from gacha or by buying it for a ludicrous amount on the auction house. I'm going to show damage test between this and the regular one, just so you can see how much of a difference it makes, but also so that you can see that this build still can do well without it. It does completely fine, and you can still do really well, but this thing makes a massive difference. Okay. Give me a second. I'm going to go through some math for these 2 options, and then we're going to come back. Okay, I'm back after extensive testing. And I don't know why I hadn't thought about this one sooner. Now, this is with an asterisk. We're asterisking this one. Preemptive Strike is hands down. It's not even close to better than any other link rune in terms of being the next one. And the reason, and this, again, I completely forgot about this, is this gives pain effect on hitting an enemy at full hit points. So pain effect for 2 seconds. And in those 2 seconds, you can kill a lot of stuff. Now, if you're talking about target dummy, obviously this thing is disgusting because enemies always going to be at full health. But the difference at a target dummy between this and any other link rune, and again, I hadn't thought about this one till the end. I was doing X number, doesn't matter what the number is, because again, I was changing other things, like this isn't supposed to be in here. I tried every possible link rune that I could have gone through. Actually, hold on, let's go through and I'll show you all the ones I did testing with. So we did Mana Storm, not the Transcendent version. We did Spot Weakness. We did Improved Technique. We did... what else? Oh my gosh, there was a bunch. Now I can't remember any of them. We did Overpower, which actually did surprisingly well. Deadly Poison. We did Strike. We did a bunch of things. And it did X number. And with this on, it did 3X number. It didn't just increase the damage on here, it increased the damage on here. And this is the more important thing. Because when it comes right down to it, this does 8 to 10, let's call it 8 to 12% of my total damage. And this one does so much more. So using Preemptive Strike is now going to be my new thing. Obviously, Preemptive Strike, if you don't know what it does, when you hit an enemy at full hit points, it does a huge amount of damage. In this case, I get 41.5 damage amp for that first hit. But then it gives me, for 2 seconds, I get Preemptive Strike, which is another 11% damage amp, and it is a global buff. I'm going to do a separate video coming up very soon about global versus local, but it's a global buff, so that means this 11% amp goes to my other skill. It also gives me critical rate and critical damage against enemies at full hit points for that 2 seconds, and that's going to affect everybody. And then the more important thing here is that we get Pain Effect, and Pain Effect is a damage taken increase, and I talked earlier about how the decreased duration, because it gives me poison damage taken amplification, Pain Effect works the same way. It doesn't scale linearly. It causes more damage than you would expect. So getting the Pain Effect on here, even intermittently, is going to be a massive help. So that's my new setup. So we've changed out this, and I highly recommend a Preemptive Strike on your Plague Spike. Now, as for the Awakening on it, which I don't have an Awakening right now, as for the Awakening on Preemptive Strike, it's not going to make much of a difference, again, because your Plague Spike isn't doing the damage. So you can go with Source, or you can go with Verity. It's not going to make much of a difference, honestly. Okay, so that's the one main skill out of the way. Now we've got the other skill to talk about, which is Toxic Mist. Okay, Toxic Mist. So Toxic Mist is our main damage dealer by a huge margin, massive margin. And that means we can do things differently with it than we would with the other. So let's start with the basics here. We've got concentrated area damage. Concentrated area damage is just a lot of damage amplification. And because the explosion on this can't go above a certain size, it doesn't matter if we get a lot. So it's at 251. It can't exceed 300. So it doesn't really matter because this is primarily going to be for single target. This will clear most of the trash, and then this will take care of the big stuff, the bosses, the champions, and that kind of thing. So that's our big boy. And concentrated area damage is just a whole bunch of damage with very little downside. Next, we've got Strike. Actually, hold on. With the Source Awakening, the Source Awakening is more damage amplification, more dampening. But again, the dampening doesn't matter, so that's nice to have an extra 6%. Strike is another one that people don't realize it is what it is, even people that have played for a while. So Strike gives you a ton of damage amplification, but nukes your cast or attack speed, but only for the one it's linked to. Since Toxic Mist is not being cast, it is being triggered, its cast speed is determined by our Plague Spike, not by its own cast speed. So losing the cast speed here is nothing. It's completely nullified. It doesn't matter. So we get quite a bit of strike damage amplification. I think it's 36% or something like that, which is a decent amount with no downside. We've got maximized damage increase. Again, maximized damage increase is really good if you have enough critical that you can lose it. And in this case, we can, because we are also using, in conjunction with it, opportunistic strike, which is another one that I got to give credit to multiple people that have talked to me on stream, because I misread this thing until somebody really said, what are you talking about? So I thought all it gave was critical rate, and I was already at max crit. Why would I bother using this thing? Because the opportunistic strike buff gives critical damage per stack and gives you up to 5 stacks. And with the... We're going to talk specifically about the Awakening in a minute, but long story short, you can get like 300% critical damage from this. It's a lot of critical damage. And because of it, I can drop other critical things because the critical rate of Plague Spike basically doesn't matter. I'm getting very high crit with it. I'm getting like 90%, but its critical rate being at 100% doesn't affect the damage hardly at all. But the critical damage here with the critical rate is a big buff. So opportunistic strike. Now, the Awakening is really important here, and I really got to talk about this. If you are just starting out with this one, take Source, okay? Hands down, take Source. It's strike damage amplification, and it's flat. It's not a big deal. Origin is better, but only if you get 2 for the opportunistic strike max stack and very close to the 20%. I did a ton of testing when I was initially working with this. I think I awakened this thing. This is why I'm out of Awakenings. I think I awakened it 15 times to get what I got. If you get a 2 and it's 30%, it's way worse. It's way worse in damage than just taking Source. If it's 1 and 20%, it's way worse. It's only better if you hit 2 and very close to 20. And if you look at mine, I've got 20.2. So it's just about as good as it could possibly get. If you don't have a lot of Awakenings, don't take the Origin Awakening, just take the Source Awakening. It's more straightforward. This will be better over long term in a longer fight. This one's not going to make a difference. So if you're low on resources or whatever, go with the Source Awakening as opposed to Origin. But Origin does eke out the win with 2 and close to 20. So there's those. And Mana Storm. Now, I don't personally like Mana Storm because it's just some damage and some resource cost. It is a big cost difference here, and it took me a long time to get enough mana conservation that it's not an issue. And when I get my other seal at 1600 points, I might have to change this. So if by the end of the video I do change it, the section right after this, I'll be talking about the one I changed it to. So again, there's that. Those are the ones I'm using and the awakenings I'm using. The Toxic Mist itself, Awakening, has a couple of different options here, and the one I initially was using was Source, because the shot occurs twice. But the projectile damage dampening made it not as strong as the Origin one. It can hit the same target multiple times, which means each hit is hitting the target 5 times, because it's got 5 little explosions. But again, much like the other one, you really want to make sure that you're getting as high on the projectile damage. So you want ideally 60 and 15. I'm not sure what I have on mine right now. Where oh my god, where even are you? I have 50 and 17. And I need to reawaken it because it'll make that much more of a difference as you get those. But the one that hits multiple times is not as good, even awakened properly, as this is at single target, as long as you get halfway decent. Obviously, I'd like to do more in terms of getting this better, because the dampening and the damage dampening when hitting the same target repeatedly are, you want both, or hold on, sorry, I want 50 and 15, not 60 and 15. So yeah, that one's pretty close with 50.7 and 17. I'm really tired. So there's the main skills. And again, this one's damage doesn't matter nearly as much. It's what it's doing for us, and what it does for us is very good. Again, obviously, Transcendent activation is the go-to between these two. And again, I'm going to show damage tests, a bunch of different damage tests after I'm done the rune board, talking about the different damage stuff. But it's a really big difference with this, if you can get it. Okay. So that's there. Let's move on to toggles. So, toggles. Obviously, we've got the standard fare here. We've got offensive and defensive. Main offensive one is Seal of Striking. Obviously, you're going to connect it to dampen resource cost to bring its cost down. Again, we have a very high cost. We want to keep that down as much as we can. We're going to get it connected to improved technique. Now, improved technique, it is important to note that there is no reason to ever level it beyond 40. Once it hits 40, it's giving you everything it can, which is 4 extra levels. Don't level it beyond 40, it will do nothing for you. The other one we have on here is Enhanced Seal Range, which does not need to go beyond level 1. Level it up to Legendary, it gets 10% aura and seal effect, and that's all that matters to us. If we increase it beyond that, the aura range increases, but it's only for us. We don't use minions, and we aren't using it to boost other players, so it doesn't matter. You only need to get it, you can see mine's level 3, because it's getting a +2 from here, and that's it. The Seal of Striking itself only has one awakening that's worth looking at, and that is the Verity with resource cost reduction. Obviously, you can try to get it lower. It doesn't make too much of a difference, though. So that's there. The next one we're going to count as technically an offensive toggle is Thunderbolt. Thunderbolt is really here to set off extra stuff for us. So it's here to set off Essence Drop Chance Increase and Item Drop Rarity. You can also switch it out for things like Charm Drop, all the other drop rate things that you get from the guild runes, any of the ones that you need, whatever it happens to be. The other two things we are putting on here is Continuous Shock and Status Effect Enhancement. We hit very hard and we have Shock Effect because we have additional lightning, but this, because it gets additional boosted stuff, and between these it's getting even more, which means the shock effect does actually quite a bit more. Now, it's not necessarily worth going nuts on this thing. Again, you can use the shoulder, and I did for a while because I just happened to have the shoulder, and it's not bad, but it doesn't need the shoulder to get the Source Awakening, which gives extra hits, okay? You want the +2 projectile count. The damage itself doesn't matter. Okay, so you really just want the extra projectile count. And then the Continuous Shock with the Origin Awakening, so that we have the shock effect, and you want to get that as close to 20 as you can. And then Status Effect Enhancement, again, for Status Effect Debuff Effect. And that's all the stuff you want there. There is an Awakening, and it's not even worth really looking at. There's damage against debuffed enemies, which is only for this skill, which doesn't do hardly anything. Status effect damage, which is for dots, and it's only from this skill, which doesn't cause dots. And then there's crowd control duration. Take the crowd control duration because there's an off chance that this will bind an enemy and you get a little bit longer duration on it. That's the only one even worth looking at, and honestly, it's not even worth really looking at. Obviously, again, we've got it on dampen resource cost with the Verity Awakening to bring its cost down. And again, the other ones that you put on here are really only there to give you item drop rarity increases and stuff like that. It's not really for any other purpose. And again, if for some reason you are new and starting out and having trouble, this is not necessary. It is absolutely not required for the build to be completely functional. It's a nice little addition for when it hits enemies, and the thing is, it has to hit an enemy before something else hits it, the way how debuffs work in this game. So it's very minor overall, but it is a damage difference, and I am going to show it in the testing afterward. Hopefully I'll remember to do all the testing. Aside from that, we've got three other toggles. They're all defensive. Now, I have them on the other page because I have the Runemaster points to do so. Obviously, if you don't have the Runemaster points to do it, you can give up something like Thunderbolt to get the other ones. The other ones are more important, in my opinion, and the only reason I'm doing it is because I have the Runemaster points to spend. So, again, everything's connected to resource cost, dampen with Verity. We've got Seal of Dodge, Seal of Defense, so dodge and armor, and then we've got the very important one, Cold Armor. Obviously, Cold Armor is in here. I've talked about it many times. It's going to give us 147.3 barrier, and then it's going to give us whatever bajillion % from either the chest piece in you're wearing, a chest piece in your Lacrima, or the Distortion Stone. So this is a huge amount of barrier on top of some cold armor. Like when they hit you, they have a chance to freeze. You can do a couple things to increase these three things if you have the space or want to do it. One, you can connect them to Improve Technique. Will give them extra levels and give them a little bit more stuff. It's very minor. It's barely worth doing. The other thing you can do for the other two is the same as the Seal of Striking. You can put on Enhanced Seal Range and put that on and get some stuff. Again, the Transcendent version of Improved Technique is better. It's virtually impossible to get, so you're not going to do anything. Time Acceleration, I see people that are new to the game equipping Time Acceleration. All Time Acceleration does is change the time you can toggle it on and off. That's all it does. It does nothing else. If you put it on, it's going to make the thing cost more mana. So keep in mind when you link other things, it's just going to make the mana cost of these go up, which is why I don't have those other things on, because it's such a small change and I'm not gaining much from it. I think that's all my toggles. Now there is one other toggle I always like to bring up. It's so minor and it's not really worth using anymore, especially with us using Vision Shift as our movement skill. But there is a thing. Where are you? I always lose track of it. Unite Crowd. Unite Crowd is a toggle that you can turn on that if you use the Verity Awakening, you can get 20% move speed when you have it on. That's it. That's all it does. It doesn't do anything else for us. If you switch it to the other thing, you get 50 to 70% armor instead of the move speed. It's not worth using, but I always like to bring it up because people ask about stuff they can use. And that's one you can use if you really want 20% more move speed. But again, with Vision Shift, this thing moves like hot buttered lightning. You don't need to worry about it. Okay, let's get to movement and triggers. So, movement skill. Now, the movement skill here is very important to the build. A lot of the time, I just say, go with whatever move skill you feel works. In this case, this build does infinitely better with movement skill on. Okay, Vision Shift. Vision Shift is a skill that can trigger other spells. And because of that, we can make it trigger Poison Area. So when we dive into an enemy group, we set off Poison Area, and then we're getting the bonus from our necklace as well as taking less damage. It is wonderfully powerful, and I will show you the damage tests. Again, I'm hoping to remember to do all the damage tests after, but it's very strong. So Vision Shift with the Source Awakening, and we want the Source Awakening because it's got cooldown dampening and movement skill, and it gets cooldown dampening per movement skill. So make sure you roll it to 2 movement skills so you get 20% cooldown. And then as you gain movement skill from other sources, whether it's gear or your zodiac or your jewel score, and you get extra uses, you will get the cooldown down on this. You can see that mine's at 0.5. It can go down to 0.3, which means you can use this thing 3 times a second indefinitely, which is amazing for moving around. So the problem with that is the mana cost goes bonkers. Now, what I'm going to do here, you can see I have a space, is because I'm going to be putting a dampened resource cost here. I've already got a preserve mana on it with the, preserve mana, the Origin Awakening, so that it gives you less stacks but more effect, because we want it to go off as much as possible. It's going to reduce the mana cost of this so we can use it a lot. Now, if you're going to be hitting groups of enemies all the time, the build will sustain it anyway. You won't have to worry about the mana cost of it. If you are doing something like backtracking, you run out of mana very quickly with it, which is why I'm going to be moving the resource cost dampen, or putting a new copy in up here. The other stuff we want on here is Disarm with the Source Awakening for the cooldown recovery speed. Now, again, there's other things you could use, but this is the one that's, the cooldown is the thing we care about the most. The Time Acceleration, which again is purely here for cooldown, and the Source Awakening for literally just more cooldown. Outside of those 3, we want spell activation on hit. Now, you can, if you're insane, use the Transcendent version, but it doesn't do much, just because I've tested it, just to make sure. This is only here so that effect is going off and we can get the bonus from the necklace. This doesn't do hardly anything in terms of damage. So it's not really there for any other reason than to set off the thing. We've got it with Time Acceleration as well. So its cooldown is down because it is a max use count thing, which means if you are using it very quickly over and over, you will burn out its use count. But we've got it down to a 1.4 second cooldown and 3 uses, which means you would have to use it faster than we can use this skill to burn it out very quickly. So it's not a big problem. The Time Acceleration is there on purpose. The other things we've got on here are, this is something I don't even honestly know if it's doing anything. I don't think it is, so it's probably not even worth having it on. I've got Damage Acceleration, and this is something I need to test in my global versus local. If this is causing acceleration on dots that are not caused by it, is what I need to figure out. So this honestly could come out. I'm not even sure if there's anything else that would benefit this. Something like area effect you think would be worthwhile, but because the area, we already have so much area, the area is very large to begin with. I don't feel like putting area of effect would do anything for it. You could do use count if you are having trouble sustaining it. I don't have that issue, so I don't bother putting it on. I think there's something else that I had tested. Oh, Mana Outburst was something else I tested because it gives area of effect and cooldown, but it consumes a huge chunk of your mana, and when you're using it over and over, it became mana problem. The other one we've got on here is Improved Technique, and that's only because I was trying to get it on my Pantheon, and it happened to link up. It's not something that's going to make basically any difference to the actual skill, but I just happen to have a space, so I put it in. So that's our movement skill and its trigger that goes with it. Outside of that, we have Shout of Terror, which is spectacular. It's especially when you're talking about in Abyss Gate. Shout of Terror is, on its own, makes enemies, their element resist goes down, which is great when they're hit by it. So if we can have that going off a lot, and we have it on buff activation when hit, so when we dive into a group and we get hit, it debuffs the whole group, and then we can do a ton of damage to them. We've also got decreased duration with it, and the reason that's there is because we want to kill the enemy quickly. We don't care if the duration is really long, but this makes the effect that much more. So it's very important, I think, to have that on. because even the duration is 3.2 seconds. If you're not killing something in 3.2 seconds, it's probably something very strong to begin with, and it's going to hit you again anyway. Predator's Roar is another thing that just makes them take the vulnerable effect, so they take extra damage taken, which is really powerful. Again, that's what we talked about it with the preemptive strike, where the pain effect makes them take extra damage, and as well as the decreased duration on my Plague Spike itself. So those two are linked, and I made this change. I know this is different than it was because I figured, I'm like, wait a minute, I should move that there. Last thing we've got on here is Hushed Shout, purely for cooldown speed, because the cooldown on this is pretty long. We've got it down to 6.5 seconds with a 3.2 second duration. And actually, now that I'm looking at it, I might put something here to bring the cooldown on this down so I can have it go off more often rather than putting the mana conservation on there. Something to think about. Again, there's a lot of flexibility in a lot of these skills. Our other trigger we have is buff activation when hit on Shout of Justice. Now, if you get to a point where your, what are they called? Your gear slot upgrades are very strong. Okay, if you get to 100 or whatever, and your armor and your dodge are really high, and you don't care about armor and dodge anymore, you can comfortably drop this, and then comfortably drop either dodge or this, and use the crowd control dodge seal. It'll give you permanent dodge, so you never get crowd controlled, but it would be giving up one of these. Now, right now, I can't do that. Either of these sacrificing would be bad, but it's something to think about. And then if you get high enough that way, you could also switch these seals for the damage taken dampening seals to get more of that. There's a lot of flexibility there. Last thing we have to talk about is our enhanced skills. Hold on, let's go back. I do want to talk about Shout of Provocation. Now, I've talked about in this build that Thunderbolt isn't really particularly effective. It's only there for one reason. The other thing you can do here is use Shout of Provocation and put it on buff activation when hit. And you move this, again, it doesn't matter where they are on the board. You can get Shout of Provocation going off to also be activating Predator's Roar, and it gives you an armor buff as well as a damage buff. And when you do high-end Abyss Gate, depending on how your board is set up, it's probably ideal to swap all of this out and put so like in my case, I would do something like this, and then put something like that, and then I could put my Shout here, and I could link it, and I could put it with a bunch of other stuff. It's a very quick change to do, as long as you remember to put the stuff on your board. It's a quick change to do that would help you in high-end Abyss Gate. Because this, again, is really only in there for farming purposes, if you're trying to really push Abyss Gates, having Shout of Provocation in there is something that can make the difference in terms of those physical hits, depending how your armor is. So, last two are the enhanced skills. So, we've got Pantheon as our defense enhance. It's a automatic basic full barrier heal. So you're going to gain 40% of your barrier per second. That's ridiculous. And the duration is 6.4 seconds. So even if you get hit after the initial loss, it'll still go back up. And with the the armor thing, the Distortion Stone, the Twilight Veil chest piece, because it has if you get hit, it'll go full, and then you know you've been hit and you're in danger, and you can activate this, and then you're going to get out of it safely. It's a really good defense enhance. There's a couple of different awakenings for it, and for what it's worth, the Origin is the only good one. The Barrier Amp while Pantheon is active is okay, I guess. It'll make your barrier up a bit, but I'd rather just have the damage taken dampening. I guess the only time I would ever switch to the source is if, for some reason, my damage taken dampening is maxed. Right now, it's at 70%, so it could get maxed out theoretically, and then I wouldn't need this, but I would go with the Origin Awakening. We've got it connected to Enhance Effect and Time Acceleration, so its cooldown is quick, And, oh, I just realized I shouldn't even have it like that. Hold on. It should be like this. There we go. So we ignore the enhance effect. We want decreased duration. Again, for the same reason as the other stuff that we use, we want this to heal us instantly and as much as we can. And its effect going off, it can't start its effect charging again. The cooldown can't start until the effect shuts off. Generally, if you need 6 seconds worth of regen, if you're standing in something for 6 seconds getting hit, you're probably doing it wrong. You want this to heal you as much as humanly possible, as quickly as possible, and that's where you want that. Time acceleration is purely there for cooldown. If you can find other things to get the cooldown on this down, that's great, but that's the important thing. And then, of course, we got improved technique on here because it's going to give it a little more effect. It's not huge, it's not necessarily very important, but there's not many things you can actually link to this that do much. You can do things like vitality recovery, which gives you health regen, but we're not a health user. You can use focus defense to give yourself some block recovery speed, which is actually not a terrible idea. Or overflowing strength, which gives you armor and resistances. They're all solid, but they're not very important. I think the block one is probably the most important one out of those. And people will have it on hit, and it's so much more important to have it on when you need it. You press the button, you manually activate it. Yes, it requires you to actually pay attention at all, but it gives you so much more if you use it manually. Obviously, our enhanced skill. Now, when I talked about the enhanced skill in the original section, the beginner section, I said to use the element release or whatever it's called. And that's fine. And you should use it through the story and until you get to a later point. Later on, marksman is drastically better for a bunch of reasons. One, your skill gets pierces when you do it, and we get damage based on pierce. Again, we're talking about plague spike, so it's not a huge difference, but we're getting extra damage per pierce because of our piercing link room. So this is giving us 8 extra pierces, which is what, 5.6% damage amp per 1 pierce, so we're gaining like 60% damage amp off of that. The other thing, the way more important thing, is that you get hit rate. Now, early on, using the other one, you're getting cast speed, which is great, but you're going to cap out your cast speed. Hit rate is something that, at the extreme end of things, is a huge problem. It's fine as you're playing through normal stuff, but once you get into Abyssgate and start getting into the higher levels, you start to miss quite a bit. And getting 900% hit rate from this is gonna, while it is active, is going to be huge. It's very important. So this is a much better thing to use because for the projectile damage versus the element damage is exactly the same because both of our skills are projectile and element. So you're getting the same amount of amp, except this one's giving you hit rate and pierce count, which is better. The stuff we have on here is all the standard fare. Decreased duration, Verity for effect and lower duration. Time acceleration with source for cooldown. Enhance effect with source for the attack enhance effect. Versatility, which is not super important later. And there's a reason to not use this and use the totem instead, and that's something I could potentially look at squeezing into here at some point once I get some more room and move some stuff around. Because the totem, I'll talk about the totem after this, but the totem is solid provided you can stun the enemy, which is great up to Abyssgate 30, and then you can't stun the enemies and then they're going to kill the totem anyway, so it's not going to make a difference. Early on, versatility is going to give you cast speed while the effect is up and element penetration, which early on getting element penetration is difficult to do. So having a little bit extra, but really it's only in here for the attack enhanced skill rune duration. So you don't even need to level this to get anything out of it. You can just get it to legendary and leave it at level 1 and you'll still get this duration. It's not much, but it's something. Improved technique is going to give it 4 levels, which is a decent amount. In fact, here, I'll show you. but it's not a lot. It's not nearly as much as it would be on a main skill. So we have 442.7 projectile amp, and we take that off and we go down to 433. So it's it's good, but it's not a huge difference. It's not going to break the world having it on there, but it's definitely something good to have. Whew. Okay, and now we're going to talk about the totem, and then we're going to finish the rune board up. We're actually going to talk about two things. We're going to talk about the totem, and we're going to talk about the second skill. Now, I completely forgot as I was going through this. You have to have 1100 jewel score to use 2 seals. Until then, just pick one of these 2. It doesn't matter which one. When it comes to your offensive seals, do Seal of Striking first, and then if you manage to get to 1600 jewel score, which is very difficult to do even with the extra jewel slots, you're going to want the element one, which is down here. Seal of Condensed Elements. Even maxed out, it's solid. It's going to give you, I think, 400% like maxed out. Oops, that's the wrong thing. So yeah, 328% plus whatever effects and stuff you have on it, which is a decent amount of damage, but it's not like super amazing. If you get to 1600 jewel score and you can use it, absolutely do. If not, it's not a big deal. So the totem that I am talking about is, what is it? Totem of weakness? Weakened totem. Okay, so it's going to cause a vulnerable effect on enemies. Talked about vulnerable effect of different sorts. They all stack, and it's going to let the enemy take 20 however much damage increase. And again, it doesn't work quite like damage amp. It works better than damage amp. If you can get this and its corresponding link rune, which I think is green. Nope. Hold on. Where are you? Spell activation. I'll find it. Buff active or totem activation upon using an enhanced skill. You can link that to your marksman, and then when you use marksman, it will drop that totem. And if you're close to the enemy, it'll drop it on top of them, and they will take a bunch of extra damage. Then you can link a bunch of totem stuff to it to make the totem stronger and whatnot. Again, the downside of this thing is if you're using it on enemies that have like large area of effect attacks or are just very heavy movement, they're not going to stay in it very long. It's not worth giving up a bunch of space just to cram that in. If you can get it in, it's great. If you're purely doing target dummy and care about big PP numbers, it's spectacular. But in combat, it's not nearly as effective. Last thing we do have to talk about here is our rune stones. And as always, rune stones are not particularly amazing. They are fine. You should try to get them, but they're not going to blow your mind. The main thing you want is a plus rune level to your main skill. You can get a blue one that is like 1 to 2 levels, and then you can get the unique one that is, I think, 1 to 4 levels. Does it show? No, I can't see. But that's going to make a big difference to your damage on your main skill. Okay, the extra 4 levels. After that, you're going to want one for your attack, aura, and seal. So your seal of striking. Again, they can get like 20%, which is a decent amount of strike damage amp. And the last one, you want one for your attack enhanced skill. If you can get one that is an attack enhanced skill that has increased effect when green, seal, or whatever, there's a bunch of secondary ones that you can get that are powered up more, but finding one with those is very difficult. But those should be your 3. There's no way to stack them. You can't use 2 in the same slot. There's not a lot of stuff going on. So really that's what you can go for. Now there are other things that you can get that are decent, but these are the ones for this build. I'd recommend a plus level for your Toxic Mist, a attack seal effect for your strike, and then an attack enhance effect for your marksman. Whoa, that was a lot of talking. Okay, let's move on to I don't even know what we've got. Charms. So, charms. Now, initially, I was using a different charm setup because I was having armor problems, and I was using the, what's it called? The Boreal up to 80% to get the 24% armor amplification. You can do that, but honestly, it's going to be a hassle to switch it around later. So just go with this setup. So what you're going to want is two of each charm. Okay, so two Alyssa, two Leo, two Vesper. Okay, inside your tier 10 star, and then two Alyssa, two Leo, two Vesper outside of your star. And then with one thing that matters is the blessing effect on your Vesper. You will have 230, 190, 190, and that is a very solid setup. So, what do we want on them? It's the standard stuff. We're going to want crit rate, crit damage, maximize damage on everything. If you can't get crit rate, crit damage maximized, get crit rate, crit damage, or one-handed weapon damage. Any of those three are very good. When it comes to legendaries, you're going to want maximization chance up to 40-50%. And if you're over 40-50%, get strike damage amplification. You'll see that I have one that is critical damage. That is actually needed currently because I'm not capping my crit. Otherwise, I don't know if that's necessarily worth having that as opposed to the strike. I am going to eventually change it, but those are going to what you want. I have one that this is not finished, obviously. Oh, it's damage. And again, at a certain point, if you're really trying to min-max, there is a reason to not want maximized damage. If you are at 1000 maximized damage with everything, then you're not hit. The triple maximize is hitting its max. It's not going to give you any more. So actually having damage instead of maximized is going to be better in that case. But again, we're talking about very min-max stuff. Your star is going to be the standard stuff. You're going to want crit rate, crit damage, maximize chance, strike damage amp, all the same stuff you want on your charms you're going to want on your star. The charm slot upgrades, standard blessing effect on the star. There's never basically ever a reason to use any of the other ones, at least not that I've ever seen. Your legendary, the legendary blessing effect one is the one you want in your all slot, okay? Because people don't know that you can use 7 charm slot upgrades, one for all of them, and then 6 individual ones. So this one, blessing effect, and it's purely for the legacy or the legendary prefix options, which is this here. It's going to boost all of these, which is all the maximization chance and all the strike damage amp, which is awesome. That's the one you want. It is going to lower your prefixes and suffixes, but that is a sacrifice you should definitely make. After that, you want a maximize 2, which only works if you have 2 maximized things on it. So if I look at this one here and it's critical, maximized, critical, it won't work on that one. It'll only work on one that has 2 maximized. So you can see that this one has, can I not click you? It has maximized damage as the suffix and then maximized as the legendary, so it can apply to that one. If you try to put it on something that doesn't apply, the little beam will be very thin and show you that it is not working. T9 or above is another absolutely best in slot one because it does prefixes, suffixes, and your legendary. Blessing effect, we already talked about, has to be on one of them to get the Vesper 230 buff. Critical 2 is another really good one. Obviously, it's going to apply to your criticals. It's not necessarily best in slot. Actually, why am I putting that there? I just realized. Why is this not up here? Because that one's critical damage. I'm going to change stuff. I'm going to fix this afterward. This one has a critical legendary, so I would actually be getting more out of that by putting it up there. Prefix option, suffix option are both very good options. Legendary is only usable like this second blessing. I don't know how to define the difference between this legendary and this legendary. Anyways, this is the one that lowers your legendary modifier. And you can only use that really if you have a really good charm with a bad legendary, and you can use it in the interim as you get through. After that, it's not worth anything. Outside of that, the only other one to worry about is the T7 or lower. It's a really powerful charm, slot upgrade, but only if you know how to use it properly. So you need a tier 10 charm with tier 7 modifiers to make it work well. And that can be a pain to do, but it will give you the most out of a charm. It's very strong if you can get all 3 sevens on the right stuff. Okay. Is that it for charms? I think that's it for charms. Yes, it is. Okay, let me figure out what else we need to talk about, and then I'm going to talk about that. Okay, we'll rapid fire these ones. So, your offerings to the 12 gods. First, you are going to want 1 point into Vesper, and then 1 point into Aquila, and then 1 point into Akuben. Okay. The reason you put 1 point into each one before you do any of the other ones is that will give you the most amount. The initial level counts for more than each of the the levels after that. So put 1 point into those 3, and then pick either Aquila or Vesper and max it out. If you max it out and you still have points, go into Aquila and max it out. Now you'll see I have 1 point into Hamal here. That's because I had exactly enough to do 1 random one. So I did those 3, and then I had enough for 1 random one, and I went for it. It's not supposed to be there. It's just random. Ignore that. The other thing we need to do is masteries. There's a lot of ways you can go with mastery, but when it comes right down to it, the most important 2 are the weapon, so the first thing, and the second one. So you want Seasoned Attack 1 and Seasoned Attack 2 at 10. They are going to directly affect your weapon damage, which is going to give you the most damage. After that, there is a bunch of places you can put points. You can put the rest of your points into just straight damage amplification. In my case, I have gone over here to the armor one. I put the 3 points that you need to get armor dodge to get down to here for the enhanced skill rune duration, because I feel like that duration is very important. And I had 1 leftover point that I put into barrier amp. I could have gone and put this over here. There's other things you can go with, but really I feel like these 2 and this one are the most important. Do with it what you want. In alchemy, this is the standard setup I have used for every single thing. Down the left side to Unique Brewer, down the middle to Spring of Inspiration for resource cost dampening, and then the one beside it for Absolute Perfection to remove dots. Now, we are a barrier user, and again, certain things bypass barrier. I don't know what the rules to it are, but if you set your health potion very high, go into my potion, and you see mine is very high. 90, there we go, 99%, 98%. It was 91. So that means if I take damage at all, that potion will go off. And even if a dot bypasses my barrier, the second I take damage, that potion will go off and clear any dots, and then I'm immune for 1 second. And that's why we take that point in the mastery. Right there. Okay. Absolute perfection. After that, we've got chance increase elixir, and then these are just extra points because you got to put them somewhere. You might as well save yourself a little bit of money. What else do we have? We have the... what's it called? Runehunter registry. Pretty standard fare here. Movement speed. And then item drop rarity and int, because ints are most important thing. The thing that I have considered, because our movement skill is so fast, I've considered putting it into resource cost dampening, or even going down into here and dropping the movement speed, because again, we use our movement skill so frequently and it moves us so fast through maps that I don't think the movement speed is necessary. I think honestly we could drop this and go for something, one of the different things instead, and probably be a 35 barrier. Woo, 35. But you got to do something with that point. But those are what I take there. What else do we have? Our jewel score, I've already talked about. You can't do anything about jewel score, though. So just get your jewel score up as much as you can. You gain a bunch of things as you get up. The Runemaster points is definitely something we should talk about. So, I've done lots of testing over this, and I've talked many times about how the levels to your main skills are very strong. So, my first bunch of points, I put exactly enough points to get down to that and then max it. So 25 points into damage upon spell, 13 points into damage upon spell 2, 10 points into... oh, actually, no, it's not 10 points. I don't think you have to get to 10. I think you can get to 6 or something. And then get down into here, and it's 30 points to get these two, or to get one of these two. So max that out. then go back into the damage amp. You can see I have a few points into cast speed and cast speed amplification. That is to get me to 5.0. If I get the other thing I want, which is the cast speed on my ring, I'm going to take those points out and move them elsewhere. As we go down, the other one that you are always going to want are the damage amp against enemies affected by blank. There is one for all 5 of the different types of damage. You can go up to 10 on each, so it's 50% amp across the board if you can get it. And that also, you have to have the damage type. I've got all the damage types, so I will eventually get all of those. There's lots of other things you can put points into, and depending on your build and what you're doing, things like the... Where's the enhanced potion stuff? Is that the very bottom? Yes. So enhanced potion stuff, if you're an enhanced potion user, that's definitely worth doing. The other ones that I generally go into, but for some reason I decided not to, I think I just forgot about it, is the enhanced potion stuff. Now, again, I want to talk about that. The enhanced potion, so the cooldown, duration, and effect are all very nice, but the actual levels cost a lot and don't do much for you necessarily. They only give you a little bit. Are not the most important ones on here. It's better to get like the damage amp on status effect than getting those. Movement speed is completely worthless to us because we move so fast. I don't really worry about it. Resistances and stuff. Block expertise. If you are using a staff or dual wielding wands, make sure you get block expertise, both of these. Block is one of the very few defensive layers that doesn't get nuked in the Abyss Gate. Outside of that, I mean, you can get barrier to get more barrier, the int to get more damage and more barrier, and I think that's more or less it. Now, obviously, getting a huge amount of points in a season is very difficult. Like, I play pretty much every day, and I'm at 400. I think I had to, like, maybe 600 last season. So, unless you're playing on standard, getting a huge amount of these isn't really something you need to worry about. Okay, is that everything aside from like the damage tests? I'm gonna go check my notes, and then if not, you're gonna see me do talk about some damage tests and some damage numbers. Okay, so I'm not gonna do the TLDR version in this video. I'm gonna link a separate video that is the TLDR version, and then I'm gonna link them to each other in case people want to watch either. I am going to do quickly the damage tests here that I talked about in the video. So one, we're going to do a damage test between the regular Link Rune and the Transcendent Link Rune so you can see the difference. We're going to do one without Preemptive Strike to show how much of a difference it makes to this rune, not necessarily to the one it's linked to. We're going to do one without Poison Area so you can see how effective that is to the build. And then we're going to do one without Thunderbolt, show how much of a difference it is. I'm just going to do them quick, and then we're going to finish this video up. So there you can see the difference between the regular and the Transcendent Link Rune. Let me bring up I didn't actually get a screenshot. So 7.4 trillion to 3.2. So basically half. By not having that Transcendent Link Rune. It's garbage that it makes that much of a difference and that spellcasters are forced to use it to have any kind of chance against the higher end builds. But there's the difference between the regular and the Transcendent Link. And there is the difference between the, oh my god, not persistent strike. I forgot the name. The one that does damage at full hit points. And what we're really looking at here is the damage specifically between Toxic Mist, because this skill also affects Toxic Mist. So we went from 392, whatever number that is, to 354. So we lost probably 12% damage on our main skill just by taking the thing on the other. So if we look here with the preemptive strike, not persistent strike, preemptive strike. And there we have the difference between the poison area trigger and not. And you can see that it is really substantial in the amount of damage we lose from Toxic Mist because we're not standing in poison area. 392, what is that? Billion, trillion, 392 trillion to 183 trillion. It is substantial how much difference the poison area makes to the build. So it's really important to get that set up. And there we have it, kids. That is the entirety of the poison bit video and everything that I learned this season. Hopefully it helps people with other builds in the future, and obviously, if you have suggestions for this build, please let me know. With that said, as always, stay safe, pet cats, eat broccoli, and you'll see me next time.